Chapter 1, Introduction to the Science of Psychology. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Psychology, 4th edition. Chapter 1, narrated by Omar Mohsen Ibrahim Fouad. The time now is 10 p.m. Today is Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. Chapter 1, Introduction to the Science of Psychology. Chapter outline and learning objectives. What is psychology and how did it begin? LO-1 describe the scope of psychology. LO-2 summarize the goals of psychology. LO-3 identify some of the people who laid the foundation for psychology or helped establish it as a discipline. Specify their contributions. LO-4 summarize the major perspectives in psychology. How do psychologists do research? LO-5 describe how psychologists use the scientific method. LO-6 explain the importance of a representative sample, descriptive and correlation methods. LO-7 recognize several forms of descriptive research. LO-8 describe the correlation method and identify its limitations. The experimental method. LO-9 explain how the experimental method can establish cause and effect. LO-10 demonstrate an understanding of research ethics. What is psychology and how did it begin? Parallel lives. December 15th, 2012. It was a cold and rainy day in London, England. 25-year-old Anais Bordier was in a fabric shop browsing materials for her upcoming fashion show. Born and raised in the suburbs of Paris, France, Anais had come to London to study fashion design at the prestigious Arts and Design College, Central St. Martin's. Thoughts of design portfolios and fabric swatches were suddenly interrupted by Anais' cell phone. One of her friends had posted an image on her Facebook wall. Anais caught a glimpse of the post, which appeared to be a photo of her own face, but she couldn't figure out where it came from because the internet connection was slow. For 30 to 35 minutes, I couldn't look at what was happening on my phone, and I could see people commenting on it. Anais recalls, "It was driving me crazy." Extended description for I was like, what? The original wall post by Anais' friend shows her US lookalike in a YouTube video on the left. The comparison between this woman and Anais on the right is striking. When Anais finally got home, she made a beeline for her laptop. The Facebook post generating so much buzz was a screen grab from a YouTube video, a close-up of a young woman looking over her shoulder and smiling coyly. She looked exactly like Anais. Heart racing, Anais clicked on the video link, which led to a short comedy piece called High School Virgin. The young woman in the video was a mirror image of Anais, and with the exception of her US accent, she sounded identical too. Anais felt her blood pressure drop Could this person be a long-lost identical twin? Impossible. According to Anais' birth records, she was a single baby born to an unwed mother in Busan, South Korea, and adopted by a French couple, Jacques and Patricia Bordier. If this look-alike wasn't a twin, perhaps she could be a cousin, a younger sister, a half-sister. A couple of months and many internet searches later, Anais and her friends discovered the mystery woman in another online video, the trailer for a movie called 21 and Over. Anais immediately searched the online list of cast members, spotted her lookalike, and clicked on her profile. The young woman's name was Samantha Futerman, and she was born on November 19th, 1987, the same date as Anais. Video profile: Sam and Anais in their own words. Note, the story of Anais Bordier and Samantha Futerman is based on personal communications with them, as well as the book they co-authored with Lisa Pulitzer, Separated at Birth, and the documentary film Twinsters, unless otherwise specified. Quotations attributed to Anais Bordier, Samantha Futerman, and Dr. Nancy L. Siegel are personal communications. This is psychology. On a superficial level, the young actress, Samantha Futerman, appeared to be Anaïs's identical twin. Her facial features, voice, and physique were virtually the same. Of course, there is much more to a person than a physical body. Anais wondered if her look-alike shared similar attitudes, preferences, and behaviors. Did Samantha Futerman have the same offbeat sense of humor and explosive rolling laugh? Was she too a glutton for fried chicken and afternoon naps? When it came to Samantha's psychological characteristics, those related to her behavior and mental processes, Anais was totally in the dark. LO-1 described the scope of psychology. By now, you probably realize that psychology has something to do with how people think and act. But let's establish a more precise definition. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Gasping, smiling, and laughing are observable behaviors Anais might have displayed when she first saw Samantha on YouTube. Anais's mental processes included thoughts. Where was Samantha born? Was she adopted as well? And emotions, apprehension or excitement about discovering a long-lost twin. Underlying these behaviors and mental processes are biological activities, such as increased heart rate, changes in hormone secretion, and communication among neurons in the brain. All of these phenomena, behavior, mental processes, and the attendant biological processes, are potential research topics in psychology. Psychology is a broad field that includes many perspectives and subfields. The American Psychological Association, APA, has over 50 divisions, representing various subdisciplines and areas of interest. APA ND-D and the Association for Psychological Science, APS, recognizes over 100 different societies, organizations, and agencies with some affiliation to the field of psychology. APS and D, each chapter in this text covers a broad subtopic representing one of psychology's primary subfields. As scientists, psychologists can conduct two major types of research, basic and applied. Basic research, which often occurs in university laboratories, focuses on collecting data to support or refute theories. The goal of basic research is not to find solutions to specific problems, but rather to gather knowledge for the sake of knowledge. General explorations of human memory, sensory abilities, and responses to trauma are examples of basic research. Applied research, on the other hand, focuses on changing behaviors and outcomes. It often leads to real-world applications, such as specific behavioral interventions for children with autism spectrum disorder, or innovative keyboard layouts that improve typing performance. Applied research may incorporate findings from basic research, but it is often conducted in natural settings outside the laboratory. In addition to basic and applied research, psychologists further distinguish between quantitative and qualitative approaches. Quantitative means measurable, so this type of research focuses on collecting data that can be summarized and analyzed with statistical methods. Not all research is number-based, however, qualitative studies, which use methods of collecting in-depth information to characterize phenomena from a subjective perspective, also play an important role in the field of psychology. Lewandowski, ETAL, 2023. What's our aim? The answer to this question varies according to subfield, but there are four main goals: to describe, explain, predict, and change behavior. These goals lay the foundation for scientific approach and the research designs used to carry out experiments in psychology. Let's take a closer look at each one. LO2 summarize the goals of psychology. Describe. The first goal is to describe what we observe. Before we can understand behaviors or situations, we need to systematically examine them. Observation can be the starting point for a new research program, and sometimes it is the only way to explore a rare occurrence. Imagine you are a psychologist who wants to describe how mindfulness meditation might be used to reduce anxiety among school children. Once you have identified a group of students who are beginning a new meditation program at their school, you might assess and describe the students' academic performance, social adjustments, anxiety levels, and physical health. Then, after the meditation program is underway, you can monitor the participants over time, conducting assessments at various stages. Your goal would be to collect information in a systematic, unbiased way and to create a snapshot of the phenomenon. Let's meditate, class. Children meditate with their teacher. Could this activity improve their mental health? A small preliminary study of 6th graders found that students who practiced mindfulness meditation in school reported greater improvement in emotional well-being than those who did not engage in meditation. Kang, ETAL 2018, page 163. Some evidence suggests that mindfulness meditation triggers positive changes in the brains of children. Shenok, ETAL 2020. Explain. Another goal of psychology is to organize and make sense of research findings. Suppose you find that students report lower anxiety after the mindfulness meditation. Suppose you find that students report lower anxiety after the mindfulness meditation program is implemented. This observation may prompt you to explore what factors could influence anxiety levels. Searching the scientific literature for clues, you might come across studies suggesting that a combination of yoga and meditation can reduce symptoms of anxiety through an increase in coping skills. Bassano, ETAL 2018. If you determine that the reductions in anxiety are associated with improved coping skills, this could help explain why these students are feeling less anxious. However, you still would have to conduct a controlled experiment to determine whether meditation causes these effects. More on the experimental method later in the chapter. Predict. If an explanation is valid, it can be used to predict behaviors or outcomes, another important goal of psychology. supposedly determined that the decrease in anxious behaviors results from improved coping skills learned through mindfulness meditation. Then you could predict that meditation might lead to the same outcome among students at other schools and perhaps in other groups of people as well. Then you could predict that meditation might lead to the same outcome among students at other schools and perhaps in other groups of people as well. Patients dealing with chronic pain, for instance. Indeed, researchers report that mindfulness meditation can help patients struggling with pain to direct their focus, to quiet the mind, and create calmness. Darnell, 2019. Change. An additional goal of psychology is to change or control behavior. This refers to how we can apply the findings of psychological research to direct behaviors in a beneficial way. In this example, you could use the findings to help schools implement meditation in their curricula. Simple, ETAL 2017. Connection established. Los Angeles, February 21st, 2013. A Twitter notification appeared on Samantha Fuderman's phone. Hey Sam, my friend Anais sent you a message on Facebook. Check it out. It might be in the spam box. Bordier, ETAL 2014, page 17. Sam did not recognize the sender of this message, nor did she know anyone named Anais. She opened Facebook and found a friend request from Anais Bordier, a 25-year-old woman living in London whose face appeared to be an exact duplicate of her own, a knot tightening in her stomach. Sam accepted Anais's friend request and opened up her message. Hey, my name is Anais. I am French and live in London. About 2 months ago, my friend was watching one of your videos with Kev Jumba on YouTube, and he saw you and thought we looked really similar. Like, very, really similar. I checked more of your videos, which are hilarious, and then came upon the How It Feels to Be Adopted, and discovered you were adopted too. Bordier, ETAL 2014, page 13. Sam stared at her phone, mystified. Anais Bordier, a complete stranger living halfway around the world, had begun to dismantle her life story with a single Facebook message. According to Sam's papers, she was a single baby born to a mother in Busan, South Korea, and adopted a few months later by Jude and Jackie Fuderman of New Jersey. Scouring Anais's Facebook photos, Sam discovered more parallels. Anais had freckles on her nose, uncommon among Koreans. She wore the same kind of goofy animal costumes for Halloween, and comments from friends hinted that she had some of the same personality quirks. The physical resemblance was breathtaking. I thought she could be my reflection in a mirror, Sam recalls. It was beyond comprehension. It was beyond comprehension. Bordier, ETAL 2014, page 32. It would take 3 months for Sam and Anais to finally meet in person, but thanks to Facebook, Skype, and WhatsApp, they would already be extremely close. Communicating daily, Sam and Anais began to uncover a mountain of shared characteristics, more evidence that they were twins.
Love at first Skype. 6 days after making contact on Facebook, Sam left and Anais had their first face-to-face conversation on Skype. They began about 12:30 a.m. Paris time and continued until almost 4 a.m. Speaking to Anais on Skype was unreal. I mean, we had to be twins, Sam recalls in the book she co-authored with Anais, Separated at Birth. Bordier, ETAL 2014, page 102. There was no reason to be scared anymore, Anais writes. Even though I didn't have absolute proof, I had found my sister, page 100. Nature and nurture. Twin research matters to all of us. Let's suppose Sam and Anais are indeed identical twins. This means that their genes, the units of heredity passed from parents to children, were identical at conception, making them virtually equivalent in their nature. Abdilal, ETAL, 2015, McRae, ETAL, 2015. But growing up in separate households means they have experienced distinct sets of environmental forces, making them different in their nature. But growing up in separate households means they have experienced distinct sets of environmental forces, making them different in their nurture. Any similarities observed between the two women are likely influenced by their common nature, whereas differences are presumably linked to their unique upbringing and life experiences or nurture. Studying identical and fraternal twins, those raised together and those raised apart, helps psychologists learn how nature and nurture interact to produce a variety of characteristics, from personality traits to brain function. Gustafsson, ETAL 2022, Y. Wang, ETAL 2022. For example, researchers have found that identical twins, even those raised apart, tend to be very close on measures of personality. Bouchard, ETAL 1990, Siegel 2012. This suggests that genes, nature, can play a major role in shaping personality characteristics, an idea supported by genetic research. Anderson, ETAL 2022. Vander Linden, Shermer, ETAL 2018. Vugasovic and Bratko 2015. Twin research is not just important to twins, it has implications for parents and children all over the world. Consider autism spectrum disorder, a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by differences in social communication and interactions. Research suggests that autism has a strong genetic component, though environment plays a role. Yoon, ETAL 2020. Suppose one identical twin develops autism spectrum disorder, but the other twin does not. That means some factors in the environment, perhaps even those present during embryonic and fetal development, could have triggered the development of the disorder. D. Siu, ETAL 2017. If we can identify triggers, which may be numerous and complex, then we can benefit from that knowledge. Siegel, 1999. Studies of identical twins and fraternal twins, who, like non-twin siblings, share approximately 50% of their genes, have helped psychologists untangle the roles of nature and nurture in a variety of areas, including intelligence, sexual orientation, aspects of personality, and psychological disorders. Refer to the chapters covering intelligence, human sexuality, personality, and psychological disorders. Same species. Really? Would you believe that these two butterflies belong to the same species? The wing markings and color differ because they were born in different seasons and therefore exposed to distinct environmental pressures. Hay, 2009. A testament to the power of nurture. What are the psychology roots What are psychology's roots? You have now learned some key lessons about psychology, areas of inquiry, goals of research, and the ever-important roles of nature and nurture. Soon you will explore the basics of psychological research, how psychologists use a scientific approach, the many types of studies they conduct, and the ethical standards that guide them through the process. But first, let's take a trip back in time and meet the people whose philosophies, insights, and research findings molded psychology into the vibrant science it is today. Who planted the seeds of psychology? LO3. Identify some of the people who laid the foundation for psychology or helped establish it as a discipline. Specify their contributions. Ancient and medieval scholars. The origins of psychology lie in fields as diverse as philosophy and physiology. In ancient Greece, the great philosopher Plato, 427 through 347 BCE, believed that truth and knowledge exist in the soul before birth. That is, humans are born with some degree of innate knowledge. Plato raised an important issue that psychologists still contemplate: the contribution of nature in the human capacity for thinking. One of Plato's renowned students, Aristotle, 384 through 322 BCE, went on to challenge his mentor's basic teachings. Aristotle believed that we know reality through our perceptions, and we learn through our sensory experiences. This approach is now commonly referred to as empiricism, and it is how scientists acquire knowledge through their observations and experiments. Ludden, 2021. The empirical method is an invaluable tool for psychological research. Aristotle has been credited with laying the foundation for an objective approach to answering questions, including those pertaining to psychological concepts such as emotion, sensation, and perception. Slife, 1990, Thorne, and Henley, 2005. This notion that experience or nurture plays an all-important role in how we acquire knowledge contradicts Plato's. This notion that experience or nurture plays an all-important role in how we acquire knowledge contradicts Plato's belief that it is inborn or in our nature. Today, psychologists agree that both nature and nurture, that is, inherited biological factors and forces in the environment, are important. As discussed above, current research explores the contribution of each through studies of heredity and environmental factors. Like Aristotle, the medieval mathematician Ibn al-Haytham, 965 through 1039 CE, embraced empiricism through systematically arranged experiments and geometrical proofs. Ibn al-Haytham created a theory of vision that had a lasting impact on the fields of physics and medicine. Danish Fard, ETAL 2016, Subra 2003, Para 6. In addition to being the father of optics, this Islamic scholar espoused a way of thinking that foreshadowed today's version of the scientific method used by psychologists and other scientists. He appreciated the importance of publishing and replicating results. Danish Fard, ETAL 2016, page 228, and was skeptical of commonly accepted truths, which he believed to be immersed
in Uncertainties. Sabra, 2003, para 7. A Scientific Mindset. Medieval mathematician Ibn al-Haytham rejected the once common belief that the eyes emit light, enabling us to see things. He proposed that vision is made possible by light coming from objects, an idea we know. He proposed that vision is made possible by light coming from objects, an idea we now know to be correct. Sensation and Perception, chapter. Descartes, another influential skeptic, was French philosopher René Descartes. René Descartes, 1596 through 1650, famous for saying, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes believed that most everything else was uncertain, including what he saw with his own eyes. He proposed that the body is like a tangible machine, whereas the mind has no physical substance. The body and mind interact as two separate entities, a view known as dualism, and Descartes, along with many others, wondered how they would. The body and mind interact as two separate entities, a view known as dualism, and Descartes, along with many others, wondered how they were connected. Descartes' work allowed for a more scientific approach to examining thoughts, emotions, and other topics previously believed to be beyond the scope of study. Psychology is born. Thus far, the only people in our presentation of psychology's history have been a mathematician, a physicist, and various philosophers. Where are all the psychologists? You may be wondering. The answer is simple. There were none. It wasn't until the 19th century that psychology emerged as a scientific discipline. In 1879, Wilhelm Wundt, 1839 through 1920, founded the first psychology laboratory at the University of Leipzig in Germany, and for this he generally is considered the father of psychology. Equipped with its own laboratory, research team, and meticulous accounts of experiments, psychology finally became a discipline in its own right. Landrum, 2016. The overall aim of Wundt's early experiments was to measure psychological processes through introspection, a method for examining one's own conscious activities. For Wundt, introspection involved effortful reflection on the sensations, feelings, and images experienced in response to a stimulus, followed by reports that were objective, meaning free of opinions, beliefs, expectations, and values. In order to ensure reliable data, Wundt required all his participants to complete 10,000 introspective observations. Prior to starting data collection, his participants were asked to make quantitative judgments about physical stimuli, how strong they were, how long they lasted, and so on. Boring, 1953, Schultz and Schultz, 2016. Wundt measures the mind. In 1861, Wilhelm Wundt conducted an experiment on reaction time, which was a turning point in the field of psychology, using a pendulum that hit a bell upon reaching its outer limits. Wundt demonstrated a tenth of a second delay between a person hearing the bell and nothing. Wundt demonstrated a tenth of a second delay between a person hearing the bell and noted the position of the pendulum and vice versa. It was during this very brief period that a mental process occurred. Finally, activities of the mind could be measured. Thorne and Henley, 2005. Structuralism. British-born psychologist Edward Titchener, 1867 through 1927, who was a student of Wundt, developed a movement in psychology known as structuralism. In 1893, Titchener set up a laboratory at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where he conducted introspection experiments aimed at determining the structure and most basic elements of the mind. Titchener's participants, also extremely well trained, were asked to describe the elements of their current consciousness. In contrast to Wundt's focus on objective, quantitative reports of conscious experiences, Titchener's participants provided detailed reports of their subjective, unique, or personal experiences. Hothersoll, 2004, Ludin, 2021. So instead of providing labels for objects, the participants would describe them. An egg would be referred to as a white orb with a textured outer layer, but not an egg. Structuralism did not last past Titchener's lifetime. Nevertheless, Titchener demonstrated that psychological studies could be conducted through observation and measurement. Many psychologists are still interested in exploring subjective experiences and structures of the brain, now observable with scanning technologies, biology and behavior chapter. Functionalism. In the late 1870s, William James, 1842 through 1910, offered the first psychology classes in the United States at Harvard University. 11 years later, James received a $300 grant for laboratory equipment. Wundt was given a small research grant that same year, an indication that both these founding psychologists were being recognized by their institutions. Harper, 1950. James had little interest in pursuing the experimental psychology practiced by Wundt and other Europeans. Gundlach, 2018. Instead, he was inspired by the work of British naturalist Charles Darwin, 1809 through 1882. Studying the elements of introspection was not a worthwhile endeavor. James believed because consciousness is an ever-changing stream of thoughts, consciousness cannot be studied by looking for fixed or static elements, because they don't exist, or so he reasoned. But James did believe that consciousness serves a function, and that it's important to study how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors help us adapt to the environment. This focus on purpose and adaptation in psychological research is the overarching theme of functionalism. Students often confuse functionalism with structuralism, perhaps because the terms sound similar, but they are very different. The focus of structuralism was to uncover the structure of the mind, whereas functionalism aimed to identify the adaptive function of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Although it didn't endure as a separate field of psychology, functionalism made an impact by influencing educational psychology, studies of emotion, and comparative studies of animal behavior. Benjamin, 2007, Schultz, 2016. Those who broke barriers. Like most sciences, psychology began as a white men's club, with white males earning the degrees, teaching the classes, and running the labs. Although some progress has been made, sexism and racism are still pervasive in psychology and other academic fields. Before the 1970s, it was very difficult for people of color and women of all backgrounds to gain admission into psychology graduate programs. Alvarez et al. 2020. One of William James's students, Mary Whitten Calkins, 1863 through 1930, completed all the requirements for a PhD at Harvard, but she was not allowed to graduate from the then all-male college because she was a woman. Nonetheless, she persevered with her work on memory and personality and established her own laboratory at Wellesley College, eventually becoming the first female president of the American Psychological Association, APA, in 1905. Myler, 2016. Breaking ground. The first female psychologist to earn a PhD in 1894 from Cornell University was Margaret Floy Washburn, 1871 through 1939. Her book, The Animal Mind, a textbook of comparative psychology, 1908, which drew on her extensive research with animals, had an enduring impact on the field. APA 2013b, Washburn 2010. The first African American psychologist to earn a PhD was Francis Sumner, 1895 through 1954. After earning his doctorate from Clark University in 1920, Sumner went on to become a founder of Howard University's psychology department. He carried out his research and published articles, even when funding sources denied him financial support because he was black. Sumner's research interests included racial bias, which continues to be a highly relevant topic in contemporary psychology. APA 2019, APA 2012A, Scott et al. 2020, Todd et al. 2021. Barriers to higher education may have been highest for women of color. Sumner, mentioned above, earned his PhD in 1920, which was 13 years before a female black psychologist, Inez Beverly Prosser, 1897 through 1934, reached the same milestone. The gender gap was also apparent among Latinx psychologists. The first Latino psychologist. The gender gap was also apparent among Latinx psychologists. The first Latino psychologist to earn his PhD was George Sanchez, 1906 through 1972. In 1934, but 28 years would pass before a Latina psychologist, Martha Bernal, 1931 through 2001, received hers. Alvarez et al. 2020. Memai Phipps Clark, 1917 through 1983, was the first black woman to be awarded a PhD in psychology from Columbia University. Her work, which she conducted with her husband Kenneth Bancroft Clark, examined the impact of prejudice and discrimination on child development. Their research played an important role in the 1954 Supreme Court decision declaring segregation in public schools unlawful. Myler, 2016. Although Clark's husband held a faculty position at City University of New York, she was never allowed to teach there. Instead, she found a job analyzing research data and eventually became executive director of the Northside Center for Child Development in Upper Manhattan, Pickering, and Burchett, 2014. For the children, the work of Memai Phipps
Clark, on the left, raised awareness about the unique psychological issues affecting African American and other minority children. She and her husband founded she and her she and her husband founded Harlem's North Side Center for Child Development, which continues to provide psychological and educational services to propel struggling children forward, away from the ill effects of poverty and racism. Northside Center, ND Para 4. Nowadays, the field of psychology is more diverse, but still not an adequate reflection of demographic groups in the United States. As of 2021, 81% of working psychologists were white. Meanwhile, 8% were Hispanic, 5% Black, 3% Asian, less than 1% American Indian and Alaska Native, and 3% other racial groups. APA 2022. As for gender, approximately 60% of students earning doctorates in psychology and other social sciences identify as women. National Science Foundation 2023. For more information on occupations in psychology, refer to the Careers in Psychology appendix. Perspectives in Psychology. Some of the early schools of thought surrounding psychology had a lasting impact, while others seemed to fade. Nevertheless, they all contributed to the growth of the young science. Learn more in the Psychology's Roots infographic. Now let's explore the major perspectives in psychology, all of which shed light on the complex nature of human behavior. LO4 summarize the major perspectives in psychology. Psychoanalytic. Toward the end of the 19th century, while many early psychologists were busy investigating the normal functioning of the mind in experimental psychology, Austrian physician Sigmund Freud, 1856 through 1939, focused much of his attention on the abnormal aspects. Freud believed that behavior and personality are influenced by conflicts between one's inner desires, often sexual and aggressive in nature, and the expectations of society, clashes that primarily occur unconsciously or outside of awareness. Gay, 1988. Personality chapter. This psychoanalytic perspective suggests that personality development is heavily influenced by processes that are set into motion early in life and result from interactions with caregivers. Freud also pioneered psychoanalysis, an approach to psychotherapy or talk therapy, treatment of psychological disorders, chapter. Psychoanalysis laid the foundation for an updated and more modern approach to treatment known as psychodynamic therapy. Although Freud's name is famous, few people understand that his theories lack solid scientific support, a phenomenon termed the Freud problem. Griggs and Christopher, 2016, Stanovich, 2019. Freud takes off. Psychology's most famous icon boards his first airplane in 1928, years after psychoanalysis had gotten off the ground in Europe and the United States. Freudian ideas are still alive and well, though people often overestimate their importance in psychology. About 90% of APA members do not practice psychoanalysis, and most science-minded psychologists have distanced themselves from Freudian
notions because they are not supported by solid experimental data. Hobson 2006, Stanovich 2019. Behavioral. As Freud worked on his new theories of the unconscious mind, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, 1849 through 1936, was busy studying canine digestion. During the course of his research, Pavlov got sidetracked by an intriguing phenomenon. The dogs in his study had learned to salivate in response to stimuli or events in the environment, a type of learning that eventually became known as classical conditioning. Learning chapter. Building on Pavlov's conditioning experiments, U.S. psychologist John B. Watson, 1878 through 1958, established behaviorism, which viewed psychology as the scientific study of behaviors that could be seen and or measured. Consciousness, sensations, feelings, and unconscious processes were not suitable topics of study, according to Watson. Carrying on the behaviorist approach to psychology, U.S. psychologist B.F. Skinner, 1904 through 1990, studied the relationship between behaviors and their consequences. Skinner's research focused on operant conditioning, a type of learning that occurs when behaviors are rewarded or punished. Learning chapter. Skinner acknowledged that mental processes such as memory and emotion might exist, but did not consider them topics for psychological research. To ensure that psychology was a science, he insisted on studying behaviors that could be observed and documented. The behavioral perspective promoted by Watson and Skinner suggests that behaviors and personality are primarily determined by learning. People tend to repeat behaviors that led to desirable consequences and discontinue behaviors with undesirable consequences. According to this view, personalities are largely shaped by forces in the environment, that is, nurture. But twin studies, as noted above, suggest that nature also plays a pivotal role. The genes we inherit from our biological parents can substantially influence the people we become. Polderman et al. 2015. Humanistic. U.S. psychologists such as Carl Rogers, 1902 through 1987, and Abraham Maslow, 1908 through 1970, took psychology in yet another direction. These founders of humanistic psychology were critical of the way psychoanalyses and behaviorism suggested that people have little control over their lives. The humanistic perspective proposes that human nature is essentially positive and that people are naturally inclined to grow and change for the better. Personality chapter. Maslow 1943, Rogers 1961. Humanism challenged the thinking and practice of researchers and clinicians who had been raised on Watson and Skinner. The rise of humanism was, in some ways, a rebellion against the rigidity of psychoanalyses and behaviorism, and the notion that humans seem to have little control over their behaviors. Humanism paved the way for the field of positive psychology, which focuses on the positive aspects of human nature. More on this shortly. Cognitive. During the prime of behaviorism, many psychologists focused their research on observable behavior, yet prior to behaviorism, psychologists had emphasized the study of thoughts and emotions. In the 1950s, a new force in psychology brought these unobservable elements back into focus. This renewed interest in the study of mental processes drove the developmental of cognitive psychology. Wertheimer, 2012, and U.S. psychologist George Miller's 1920 through 2012 research on memory is considered an important catalyst for this cognitive revolution. Memory chapter.
The cognitive perspective examines mental processes that direct behavior, focusing on concepts such as thinking, memory, and language. The cognitive neuroscience perspective, in particular, explores physiological explanations for mental processes, searching for connections between behavior and the human nervous system, especially the brain. With the development of brain scanning technologies, cognitive neuroscience has flourished, interfacing with fields such as medicine and computer science. Evolutionary. According to the evolutionary perspective, behaviors and mental processes are shaped by the forces of evolution. This perspective is based on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin observed great variability in the characteristics of humans and other organisms. He believed these traits were shaped by natural selection, the process through which inherited traits in a given population either increase in frequency because they are adaptive or decrease in frequency because they are maladaptive. Humans have many adaptive traits and behaviors that appear to have evolved through natural selection. David Buss, currently a professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, is one of the founders of evolutionary psychology. He and others have used the evolutionary perspective to explain intelligence, infidelity in relationships, a variety of personality traits, and behaviors like risk-taking. Buss 2018, Buss and Penk 2015, Schultz and Schultz 2016. Evolution of superbugs. Looking for an everyday example of evolution, disease-causing bacteria like this methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, have evolved to outsmart the antibiotics we use to kill them. When exposed to the right antibiotic, a population of bacteria typically dies or becomes weakened. However, if some of those bacteria have traits that protect them against the antibiotic, they will survive and reproduce. This can lead to the proliferation of superbugs that cannot be killed with medicine. Antibiotic resistance is one of the greatest public health challenges of our time. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC 2022, Para 1. Biological. The biological perspective uses knowledge about underlying physiology to explain behavior and mental processes. Psychologists who take this approach explore how biological factors such as hormones, genes, and brain activity influence behavior and cognition. The focus of their research is varied, ranging from the genetic basis of physical fitness to the brain activity of infants and adults as they interact. Piazza, ETAL 2020, Chute, ETAL 2016. The Biology and Behavior chapter provides a foundation for understanding this perspective and introduces the field of neuroscience, which is the study of the brain and other parts of the nervous system. Sociocultural. The sociocultural perspective emphasizes the importance of social and cultural factors. Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky, 1896 through 1934, proposed
that we should examine how these forces impact the cognitive development of children. Human Development chapter. He asserted that parents, teachers, and peers play a critical role in how a child gains knowledge and skills. Hagen, 2016. In light of this realization, researchers such as Mamai Phipps Clark and Jennifer Eberhardt have studied how racial bias and discrimination impact human behavior. Pickering and Burchett, 2014, Sullivan, ETAL, 2021. In the past, researchers often assumed that the findings of their studies applied to people of all ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Then in the 1980s, cross-cultural research began to reveal that Western research participants are not always representative of people from other cultures. Even groups within a culture can influence behavior and mental processes. Thus, we need to take into account these various settings and subcultures. While some progress has been made, psychology research continues to focus on Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, aka weird cultures. Many in the field are working hard to change this. Buchanan, ETAL, 2021. Muthukrishna, ETAL, 2020. Extended description for culture matters. Culture matters. People travel the streets of Singapore on the left and Aswan, Egypt on the right. Compared to Egypt, Singapore is culturally more similar to the United States. This has important implications for psychological research. We cannot assume that research findings from the United States, the most overrepresented country in psychological research by a wide margin, apply to people of other countries. Muthukrishna, ETAL, 2020, page 685. Biopsychosocial. Psychologists often use the biopsychosocial perspective to explain behavior. In other words, they examine the biological, psychological, and socio-cultural influences involved. Beauchamp and Anderson, 2010. Take, for example, generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, discussed in the psychological disorders chapter. People with GAD may believe that the world is full of risks and take steps to avoid uncertain situations. These thoughts and behaviors are psychological, but they may be learned from parents and thus transmitted through social avenues. Akhtar, ETAL, 2017. Parents may also pass along genes that predispose their children to having thoughts and behaviors characteristic of GAD. An example of biological transmission, Gottschalk and Domschke, 2017. These factors do not exist in isolation, but are constantly interacting to shape behaviors and mental processes. The biopsychosocial perspective is used by scientists in many fields, from psychologists studying chronic pain disorders, Yagman and Miller, 2019, to physicians treating patients with sickle cell disease, Crosby, ETAL, 2015. Infographic 1.1, Psychology's Roots. Infographic 1.1, Psychology's Roots.
The first laboratory dedicated to the new science of psychology was founded by Wilhelm Wundt at the University of Leipzig in Germany in 1879. But psychology's roots go back further than that. Philosophers and scientists have long been interested in understanding how the mind works. Early schools of thought, like structuralism and functionalism, developed into contemporary perspectives, each defined by different sets of interests, prompting different kinds of questions. Extended description for infographic 1.1 psychology roots. Extended description for infographic 1.1 psychology's roots. Combining the perspectives, you can see that the field of psychology is extremely broad. BRAATETAL 2020. With so many perspectives. Table 1.1. How do we know which one is the most useful for accomplishing psychology goals? Human behavior is complex and requires an integrated approach using the findings of multiple perspectives. To explain its origins. Many psychologists pick and choose among the various approaches to explain and understand a given phenomenon. In some cases, creating a theoretical model helps clarify a complex set of observations. Models may draw from one or more perspectives and often enable us to form mental pictures of what we seek to understand. Table 1.1, Current Perspectives in Psychology. Perspective, main idea, questions psychologists ask. Perspective, psychoanalytic, main idea, underlying conflicts influence behavior. Questions psychologists ask. How do unconscious conflicts affect decisions and behavior? Perspective, behavioral, main idea, behavior is learned primarily through associations, reinforcers, and observation. Questions psychologists ask. How does learning shape behavior? Humanistic, humans are naturally inclined to grow in a positive direction. How do choice and self-determination influence behavior? Cognitive, behavior is driven by cognitive processes. How do thinking, memory, and language direct behavior? Evolutionary, humans have evolved characteristics that help them adapt to the environment, increasing their chances of surviving and reproducing. How has natural selection influenced thoughts, emotions, and behaviors? Biological, behavior and mental processes arise from psychological activity. How do biological factors such as hormones, genes, and brain anatomy influence behavior and mental processes? Sociocultural, other people, as well as broader cultural context, influence behavior and mental processes. How do social interactions and culture shape thoughts, emotions, and behaviors? psychosocial. Behavior and mental processes are shaped by complex interplay of biological, psychological, and sociocultural factors. How do the interactions of biology, psychology, and culture influence thoughts, emotions, and behaviors? Psychologists draw on a variety of theories in their research and practice. Listed here are the dominant theoretical perspectives, all of which reappear many times in this text. Human behaviors are often best understood when viewed through more than one lens. Put your heads together. A. Identify a movie or show that is familiar to all members of your group. B. Pick a scene that shows a character exhibiting inappropriate or risky behavior. C. Try to explain the behavior using at least two of the psychological perspectives outlined above. Now let's shift our focus away from abstract concepts and onto practical matters. It's time to learn about one of the most trusted approaches for acquiring knowledge, the scientific method. Show what you know. 1. The goal of blank is to gather knowledge for the sake of knowledge, whereas the goal of blank is to change behaviors and outcomes. The answer is basic research and applied research. 2. A college dean wants to increase student retention by instituting more formal study groups. She contacts members of the psychology department who design a program to encourage students to study together. This program falls under which of the main goals of psychology? A. Describe. B. Explain. C. Predict. D. Change. The answer is D. Change. 3. William James suggested that it is important to study the purpose of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how they help us adapt to the environment. This focus on purpose and adaptation in psychological research is the theme of A. Natural selection, B. Functionalism, C. Structuralism, D. Psychology. The answer is B. Functionalism. 4. We have presented 8 perspectives in this section. Describe how 2 of them are similar. Pick 2 other perspectives and explain how they differ. Answers will vary. Sociocultural and biopsychosocial perspectives are similar in that both examine how interactions with other people influence behaviors and mental processes. Cognitive and biological perspectives differ in that the cognitive perspective focuses on the thought processes underlying behavior, while the biological perspective emphasizes psychological processes. How do psychologists do research? The scientific method. LO5 describe how psychologists use the scientific method. Like all scientists, psychologists conduct research using the scientific method, a process for gathering empirical evidence or data from systematic observations or experiments. Infographic 1.2. This evidence is often used to support or refute a hypothesis, which is a statement used to test a prediction about the outcome of a study. The scientific method is used in all types of experiments, some of which we will discuss at length later in the chapter. An experiment is a controlled procedure involving scientific observations and/or manipulations by the researcher to influence participants' thinking, emotions, or behaviors. Observations must be objective or outside the influence of personal opinions and expectations. Humans are prone to errors in thinking, but the scientific method helps to minimize their impact. Let's examine the 5 basic steps. Infographic 1.2, the scientific method. Psychologists use the scientific method to conduct research. The scientific method allows researchers to collect empirical objective evidence by following a sequence of carefully executed steps. In this infographic, you can follow the steps of the scientific method using a real research example. The study outlined below explores how increases in happiness might impact physical health. Kushlev, ETAL 2020. Notice that the process is cyclical in nature. Answering one research question often leads researchers to develop additional questions, and the process begins again. Step 1. To develop a question, researchers will observe the world around them, identify an interesting topic, and review scientific literature on this topic. Step 1. Develop a question. Happier people are healthier, but does becoming happier lead to better health? Page 807. Step 2. To develop a hypothesis, a testable prediction, researchers will look for existing theories about the topic and establish operational definitions to specify variables being studied. Step 2. Develop a hypothesis. Hypotheses, participating in a program designed to increase happiness or subjective well-being, will lead to improvements in physical health. Step 3. The researchers plan a well-controlled study. Data are collected using controlled measurement techniques. Step 3. Design, study, and collect data. 1, 2, 3. Participants were divided up into 2 groups. One that engaged in a 10-week program designed to boost happiness, and another that was placed on a waiting list. Participants in both groups completed weekly surveys about their subjective well-being and health. They also received periodic blood pressure and weight checkups. Step 4. The researchers organize and analyze the data to determine whether the hypothesis is supported. Step 4. Analyze the data. The findings indicate that participants who completed the 10-week program felt progressively happier compared to the wait list group. This group also reported having fewer sick days than the wait list group. Despite feeling healthier, these participants did not experience significant changes in blood pressure and weight. Step 5. The researchers write a description of the study and submit it to an academic journal, where it will be peer-reviewed and, if approved, published for other researchers to read and use in their own research. Step 5. Share the findings. The researchers write an article titled, "Does Happiness Improve Health? Evidence from a Randomized Controlled Trial." It is published in the journal Psychological Science. The researchers read articles suggesting that subjective well-being is associated with better immunity. They think about their own study and wonder, do inventions that boost happiness lead to improvements in immune function? Ask new questions. Extended description for infographic 1.2, the scientific method. Step 1. Develop a question. The scientific method typically begins when a researcher observes something interesting in the environment and comes up with a research question. For example, twin researcher Dr. Nancy L. Siegel got the idea for her first twin study at a child's birthday party. She noticed a pair of fraternal twins working on a puzzle together and fighting over it like mad. This led her to wonder, would identical twins cooperate better than fraternal twins? Her curiosity also stemmed from years of studying behavioral genetics and evolutionary theory. The work of scientists who had come before her, reading books and articles written by scientists, is an excellent way to generate ideas for new studies. Infographic 0.1, How to Read a Scientific Article, explains how to find and read a journal article, skills that will help you in psychology and many other classes. It also shows you how to cite a journal article using the APA style established by the American Psychological Association, APA 2020B. Step 2, develop a hypothesis. Once a research question has been developed, the next step is to formulate a hypothesis. The statement used to test predictions about the study's outcome. Data collected by the experimenter will either support or refute the hypotheses. Dr. Siegel's hypothesis was essentially the following. When given a joint task, identical twins will cooperate more and complete less than fraternal twins. Hypotheses can be difficult to generate for studies on new and unexplored topics because researchers may not have fully developed expectations for the outcome. In these situations, a general prediction may take the place of a formal hypothesis. Researchers cannot just guess when they develop their hypotheses. They must carefully review research and consider relevant psychological perspectives. What perspective do you think influenced Dr. Siegel's hypotheses? While developing research questions and hypotheses, researchers should always be on the lookout for information that could offer explanations for the phenomenon they are studying. Dr. Siegel based her hypotheses on behavioral genetics and evolutionary theory. A theory synthesizes observations in order to explain phenomena, and it can be used to make predictions that can be tested through research. Many people believe scientific theories are nothing more than unverified guesses, but they are mistaken. Stanovich, 2019. A theory is a well-established body of principles that often rests on a sturdy foundation of scientific evidence. Evolution is a prime example of a theory that has been mistaken for an ongoing scientific controversy. Thanks to inaccurate portrayals in the media, frequently involving opinions by non-scientists, many people believe evolution is an active area of debate. In reality, evolution is a theory supported by the overwhelming majority of scientists, including psychologists. Step 3, design, study, and collect data. Once a hypothesis has been developed, the researcher designs a study to test it and then collects the data. Dr. Siegel's study involved videotaping sets of identical and fraternal twin children working together on a puzzle. Once the instructions were given, complete the puzzle together. The pairs of twin children were free to solve the puzzle as they wished. Siegel, 1984, page 94. Later looking at the videos, Dr. Siegel and her colleagues rated the twins using a variety of indices of cooperative behavior. For example, the researchers observed if the twins were equally involved, how often they handled each other puzzle pieces, whether they physically leaned on one another, pushed, or hit. They even tallied up the number of facial expressions each twin displayed For example, sadness, surprise, and pride. Big data uncovers big bias. Working with the Oakland Police Department, psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt collected data on 28,119 interactions between police and people in the community. The trove of data derived from police reports, neighborhood surveys, and footage from body cameras revealed that officers behaved differently toward people of different races. Parker, 2016. Black drivers were more likely than white drivers to be pulled over for minor violations and indistinct reasons. And almost 3 times more likely to be handcuffed or searched. Star, 2020, para 27. With guidance from Eberhardt, the Oakland Police Department has implemented training programs to combat unconscious biases and promote fair police practices. Star, 2020. To study cooperative behavior and other characteristics, researchers must establish operational definitions that specify the precise manner in which they are observed and measured. Operational definitions are different from dictionary definitions, which tend to be very similar across dictionaries. For example, there are probably only a handful of ways that dictionaries define the word cooperation. But because constructs like cooperation can be measured in a variety of ways, researchers need to establish objective, precise definitions for them. A good operational definition helps others understand how to perform an observation or take a measurement. In the example above, Dr. Siegel operationally defined cooperative behavior based on how often twins worked together, accepted each other's help, or smiled at each other. If you were studying intoxication in college students, your operational definition of drunkenness might be based on a psychological measure such as a blood alcohol level BAC of 0.8 or higher. What problems would result if researchers didn't operationally define the characteristics they are measuring? Gathering data must be done in a very controlled fashion to minimize errors, which could arise from recording problems or from unknown environmental factors. Suppose you are studying how identical twins react to frustrating situations. You could collect information by talking with them for several hours, but your impressions may differ from those of another researcher facing the same task. To reduce bias, interviewers should follow a consistent questioning format or coding scheme and employ operational definitions. An even more objective approach would be to administer an assessment with a standard set of questions, true or false, multiple choice, circle the number, and an automated scoring system. The results of such a test do not depend on the researcher's biases or expectations and should be the same no matter who administers it. Step 4. Analyze the data. Now that the data are collected, they need to be analyzed and organized in a meaningful way. As Figure 1.1 demonstrates, rows and columns of numbers are just that, numbers. In order to make sense of all the raw data, one must employ statistical methods. Descriptive statistics are used to organize and present data, often through tables, graphs, and charts. Inferential statistics, on the other hand, go beyond simply describing the data set, allowing researchers to make inferences and determine the probability of events occurring in the future. We take a closer look at descriptive and inferential statistics in the Introduction to Statistics appendix. Extended description for Figure 1.1 data. Figure 1.1, raw data. The information in this figure comes from a data file. Until the researcher analyzes the data, these numbers will have little meaning. The column headers are variable, record number, columns, and format. The row entries are as follows. Row 1, variable, family ID, record number 1, columns 3 through 7, and format numeric. Following the data analysis, the researcher must ask several questions. Did the results support the hypotheses? Were the predictions met? In Dr. Siegel's case, the results did support her hypotheses. The identical twins were more cooperative on almost every index that I used, she says. My conclusion was that yes, identical genes do contribute to the greater cooperation observed between partners. Even if results support a hypothesis, the researcher will reevaluate her hypotheses in light of the findings. For example, she might ask herself if the results are consistent with previous studies, or whether they increase support for a particular theory. Step 5. Share the findings. Once the data has been analyzed and the hypotheses tested, it's time to share the findings with other researchers who might be able to build on the work. This typically involves conference presentations, online discussions, and written documentation. One of the best ways to disseminate information is to write a scientific article and submit it to a scholarly, peer-reviewed journal. Journal editors send these submitted manuscripts to subject matter experts or peer reviewers who carefully read them and make recommendations for publishing, revising, or rejecting the articles altogether. The peer review process is notoriously meticulous, and it helps provide us with greater certainty that research findings can be trusted. When looking for research to support your presentations or papers, try to use a search engine that allows you to narrow your search to studies that have been peer-reviewed. Although the internet is an amazing tool for gathering information, a search engine like Google Scholar casts a wide net, and some of the articles it lists are of question. Although the internet is an amazing tool for gathering information, a search engine like Google Scholar casts a wide net, and some of the articles it lists are of questionable origin and quality. Connections. In Chapter 0, we discussed the importance of considering the source and quality of information before accepting it as valid. This is an important component of critical thinking. Connections like this are scattered throughout the text, highlighting the relationships between topics discussed in the current chapter and those presented in earlier ones. Unfortunately, the peer-reviewed method is not flawless. For example, editorial boards may show favoritism toward certain authors. One study found that articles are more likely to be accepted by prestigious journals when the authors have already published work there. Collier, 2018, Sakara, ETAL, 2018. What's more, there have been cases of fabricated data slipping past the scrutiny of peer reviewers. About 4 in 10,000 published articles end up being retracted, the result of not only errors but also plagiarism, data meddling, and other forms of inappropriate behavior. Brainerd and Yu, 2018. Such misconduct can have serious consequences for society. Case in point, the spread of misinformation about the safety of childhood vaccines which has stirred a movement among a small subset of U.S. parents. In the late 1990s, researchers published a study suggesting that vaccination against infectious diseases caused autism. Wakefield et al. 1998. The findings sparked panic among parents, some of whom shunned the shots, putting their children at risk for life-threatening infections such as measles. The study turned out to be fraudulent and the reported findings were deceptive, but it took 12 years for journal editors to retract the article. Editors of the Lancet 2010. One reason for this long delay was the researchers had to investigate all the accusations of wrongdoing and data fabrication. Godley et al. 2011. The investigation included interviews with the parents of the children discussed in the study, which ultimately led to the conclusion that the information in the published account was inaccurate. Dear 2011. Since the publication of that deceptive research, several high-quality studies have found no credible support for the autism vaccine hypotheses. Honda et al. 2005, Jane et al. 2015, Madsen et al. 2002. Still the publicity given to the original article continues to cast a shadow. Some parents refuse vaccines for their children, with serious consequences for the community. Measles outbreaks involving unvaccinated people continue to occur in the United States and other parts of the world, putting those affected at risk for life-threatening illness. World Health Organization, WHO, 2023, Zucker et al. 2020. Publishing an article is a crucial step in the scientific process because it allows other researchers to replicate an experiment, which might mean repeating it with other participants or altering some of the procedures. This repetition is necessary to ensure that the initial findings were not just a fluke or the result of a poorly designed experiment. The more a study is replicated and produces similar findings, the more confidence we can have in those findings. Some studies have proven difficult to replicate, but that doesn't necessarily mean the research should be cast aside. In some cases, difficulty with replication occurs because the topic of study is more complex or nuanced than assumed, or because methods of data analysis have changed since the original study was published. Morling and Kalin Jageman, 2020, page 169. In the case of Wakefield's fraudulent autism study, other researchers tried to replicate the research for over 10 years, but could never establish a relationship between autism and vaccines. Godley et al. 2011. This fact alone made the Wakefield findings highly suspect. Ask new questions. Although the goal is to increase our knowledge, most studies generate more questions than they answer. And herein lies the beauty of the scientific process. The results of one scientific study raise a host of new questions, and those questions lead to new hypotheses, new studies, and yet another collection of questions. New results also prompt researchers to rethink theories, as even the most established theories can be scrutinized and re-explored. You can review the cyclical nature of the scientific method illustrated in Infographic 1.2, Critical Thinking. This continuing cycle of exploration uses critical thinking at every step. Critical thinking is the process of weighing various pieces of evidence, synthesizing them, and evaluating the contributions of each. It is a type of thinking that is disciplined, clear, rational, and open to the consideration of new ideas. A critical thinker places importance on the rules of logic and science, rather than popular beliefs that may or may not have scientific backing. Lamont, 2020, page 244. For an overview of critical thinking, refer to Chapter 0 and Infographic 1.3. Infographic 1.3, Critical Thinking. What is critical thinking and why is it important? Being a critical thinker means carefully evaluating pieces of evidence, synthesizing them, and determining how they fit into the big picture. Critical thinkers maintain a healthy dose of skepticism, but they are also able to adjust their thinking if presented with contradictory evidence. Consider the issue of global warming. Do you think it's real, and are human beings causing it? At least 97% of the world's leading climate scientists believe that greenhouse gas emissions generated by human activities, such as burning gasoline and coal, are most likely driving the warming trend. Herring and Scott, 2020. Human activities have unequivocally caused global warming. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 2023, page 4. Yet some people still are not too worried about global warming, perhaps because they don't grasp the severity of the problem. Funk and Kennedy, 2020. Global warming and other climate change events are not caused by humans. Where is this information coming from? What kind of evidence supports it? A critical thinker is skeptical, thinks deeply, evaluates claims using existing knowledge, asks questions, considers alternative explanations, reflects on own emotional reactions, tolerates uncertainty, is open-minded. Critical thinking in action. Go to the source, ask critical questions. Who wrote the article? What is the professional background of the authors? Where was it published? Is it peer-reviewed, open source, or popular press? What are the study findings? Do the findings support the hypothesis? Are there limitations cited? What other variables might have influenced the outcome? What were the methods used to conduct the study? How big was the sample? How did researchers collect data? Has the study been replicated? Have other studies reported the same results? Have other studies tried different samples? Where is money coming from? What individuals or organizations provided funding for the study? And did they have an agenda in doing so? Although you will develop your critical thinking skills in psychology class, they can be used in other contexts, from resolving everyday dilemmas such as, why did I get such a mediocre grade after studying so hard, to understanding global crisis such as climate change. Extended description for critical thinking. Research basics. Enter the psychologist soon after making contact. Sam and Anais began contemplating the idea of creating a movie to capture their extraordinary story and share it with others. They knew the constant presence of a film crew would be a complete invasion of privacy, but it seemed worth the sacrifice. Their documentary film would be titled Twinsters, Twin Plus Sisters. Sam would be a producer, and the other crew members would be her trusted friends and colleagues from the film industry. The team immediately began preparing for what would become the film's climax, the first tangible human-to-human meeting of Sam and Anais. It would take place in London on May 14th, 2 days before Anais's spring fashion show. To raise money for the movie, Sam and her friends posted a proposal on the funding platform Kickstarter. Through Kickstarter, they caught the attention of twin expert Dr. Nancy L. Siegel, introduced on page 13. When Dr. Siegel learned about Sam and Anais, she immediately wondered if they had taken a DNA test to prove they were identical twins. When I found out that they had not done that, I was very worried. Dr. Siegel explains, even though Sam and Anais had the same birth dates and shared many physical characteristics and behaviors, there was still the remote possibility that they were unrelated lookalikes. Dr. Siegel had seen similar cases end in profound disappointment. As she puts it, you need the biological proof. Dr. Siegel reached out to Sam and Anais, who agreed to participate in research. They took DNA tests, which affirmed what they already knew in their hearts. They were indeed identical twins. Sam and Anais also underwent a variety of tests organized by Dr. Siegel and her colleagues at California State University, Fullerton. These tests focused on physical characteristics like height, weight, and hand preference, and psychological factors such as job satisfaction, self-esteem, personality traits, and cognitive abilities, all variables commonly studied by psychologists. Proof is in the DNA. Sam left and Anais on Skype collecting DNA samples. Sam on the left and Anais on Skype collecting DNA samples with cheek swabs. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the genetic material we inherit from our parents. And identical twins have almost the same DNA sequences, because although identical twins have the same DNA at conception, small genetic changes can occur throughout life. After collecting the samples, Sam and Anais sent them to a laboratory, and the results of the analysis confirmed that they are indeed identical twins. Variables. Measurable characteristics that can vary or change over time or across individuals are called variables. In psychological experiments, researchers study a variety of characteristics relating to humans and other organisms. Examples of variables include personality characteristics, shyness or friendliness, cognitive characteristics, memory, number of siblings in a family, gender, and socioeconomic status. The study of Sam and Anais revealed striking similarities across a variety of variables, including measures of job satisfaction and certain mental abilities and personality traits. It also unearthed fascinating differences. For example, Anais scored higher on most of the tests measuring visual spatial skills. Not a surprise to Dr. Siegel and her colleagues Francesca Cortez, who say this finding is consistent with the idea that fashion designers benefit from good visual skills. Siegel and Cortez, 2014, page 103. Meanwhile, Sam did better on some tests measuring memory, which could be a result of her experience memorizing lines for acting roles and waiting tables. Siegel and Cortez, 2014. It really would stress me out, says Sam, recalling her days running between tables. I would have nightmares. I would wake up and be like, I didn't bring his ketchup. LO6 explained the importance of a representative sample. Population and sample. The findings described above focus on just two individuals, Sam and Anais. How do researchers decide who should participate in their studies? It depends on the population or overall group the researcher wants to examine. If the population is large, all college students in the United States, for example, then the researcher selects a subset of that population called a sample. There are many methods for choosing a sample. In an effort to ensure that the sample accurately reflects the larger population, a researcher may use a random sample. With a random sample, all members of the population have an equal chance of being invited to participate in the study. A researcher forming a random sample of high school seniors planning to go to college might try to gain access to SAT or ACT databases and then randomly select students from lists compiled by those test companies. Think about the problems that may crop up if a sample is not random. Suppose a researcher is trying to assess attitudes about undocumented workers living in the United States, but the only place she recruits participants is New York City, which, along with Los Angeles and Miami, has the biggest population of immigrants. Buddyman, 2020. How might this bias her findings? A study of people in New York would certainly offer valuable insights about residents of that city. But it would not necessarily provide a complete picture of attitudes across the United States. New York residents do not constitute a representative sample or a group of people with characteristics similar to those of the population of interest. In this case, the entire U.S. population. Figure 1.2 provides a visual illustration of the concept. Population representative sample. Extend the description for figure 1.2 representative sample. The population group contains 16 people, 8 red people, 4 people. The population group contains 16 blue people, 8 red people, 4 purple people, and 12 green people. The representative sample group contains 4 blue people, 2 red people, 1 purple person, and 3 green people. Figure 1.2, representative sample. Researchers usually do not have the option to enlist an entire population in their studies, but they can strive for the next best thing, a representative sample of the population. A representative sample captures the diversity of a population, including relevant characteristics in the same proportions. For example, if half of the population is female, half of the sample should be female. If 10% of the population is Asian, 10% of the sample should be Asian, and so on. It is important for researchers to choose representative samples because this allows them to generalize their findings or apply information from a sample to the population at large. Let's say that 44% of the respondents in the study on attitudes toward undocumented workers believe current immigration laws are acceptable. If the sample is sufficiently similar to the overall U.S. population, then the researcher may be able to infer that this finding from the sample is representative. Approximately 44% of people in the United States believe that current immigration laws are acceptable. The topics we have explored thus far, the scientific method, variables, operational definitions, and samples, apply to psychology research in general. You will see how these concepts are relevant to studies presented in the upcoming sections when we explore 3 major categories of research methods: descriptive, correlation, and experimental. Show what you know. 1. A research group is interested in studying college students' attitudes about the legalization of marijuana. The group randomly selects students from across the nation, trying to pick a blank that closely reflects the characteristics of U.S. college students. Is the answer A, variable, B, hypotheses, C, representative sample, D, representative population? The answer is C, representative sample. 2. The scientific method is a process for gathering empirical evidence. This evidence is often used to support or refute a blank, a statement used to test a prediction about the outcome of a study. The answer is hypotheses. The scientific method is a process for gathering empirical evidence. This evidence is often used to support or refute a hypothesis, a statement used to test a prediction about the outcome of a study. 3. Why might it be problematic to make inferences from small samples to large populations? Answers will vary. If the population is large, the researcher will need to select a sample. A random sample is a subset of the population chosen through a procedure that ensures all members have an equal chance of being selected. Random sampling increases the likelihood of achieving a representative sample or subgroup whose characteristics are similar to the population of interest. If the sample is small relative to the population size, we must be careful about drawing inferences from sample to population. Representative samples help ensure that our inferences are meaningful in these cases, representing a major differentiation between anecdotal evidence and empirical evidence. Descriptive and correlational methods. Descriptive and correlational methods. Sam and Anais share many attributes, but they are not exact copies of one another. Obvious physical differences include height. Anais is a bit taller, and skin color. Sam is tanner from surfing in the California sun. As for psychological disparities, the twins seem to differ in their experience of emotional stress. Depending on what it is, I can just shake it off, but it will kind of live with Anais a little bit more, says Sam, who attributes this coping style to her experience growing up with two older brothers. When Sam felt stressed or upset, her brothers would often tell her to get over it and find something to do. Anais was an only child, so she did not benefit from this type of sibling interaction. Given that these women started life genetically identical, you begin to wonder about the sources of their differences. When did these disparities emerge, and what environmental factors shaped them? It would be fascinating to travel back in time and observe Sam and Anais as little girls playing with friends, interacting with family, and studying at school. If only time travel were possible, there would be endless opportunities for a psychologist to study their differing childhoods using descriptive research methods. Power of nurture. Left to right, Sam's brother Andrew, Sam's brother Matt, and Anais. Personality assessments suggest that Sam is more extroverted than her twin sister. Siegel and Cortez, 2014. Is this because Sam grew up with two older brothers, while Anais was an only child? Remember that one of the main goals of psychology is to describe what we observe. Descriptive research is a type of investigation psychologists use to explore a phenomenon. It is primarily concerned with describing and is useful for studying new or unexplored topics when researchers might not have specific expectations about outcomes. But there are certain things descriptive research cannot achieve. This approach helps us develop hypotheses about the causes of behaviors, yet it cannot reveal cause and effect relationships, a point we will revisit later in the chapter. Now let's get familiar with various descriptive research methods. LO7 recognized several forms of descriptive research. Naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation refers to the systematic observation of participants in their natural environments. And when we say natural environments, we don't necessarily mean the wild. It could be an office, a preschool, or even a dorm room. In one naturalistic study, researchers observed the behaviors of Starbucks patrons in cities across China and Hong Kong. The goal was to determine if people from different regions have distinct preferences for being physically close to others. Here's what the researchers observed. People in regions with a history of wheat growing, where farmers work more independently, were more likely to sit alone. Meanwhile, those from areas with a tradition of rice growing, where farmers often work together, were more inclined to sit with others. In this naturalistic study, we see how culture may play a role in shaping everyday behavior. Tal Helm, ETAL, 2018. Naturally, it's a challenge. As with any type of research, naturalistic observation centers around variables, and those variables must be pinned down with operational definitions. Suppose you are studying consciousness among toddlers. This is an intriguing topic, as research suggests that aspects of consciousness, such as self-control and compliance with parents, can present themselves early in life. Kim and Kochenska, 2019. At the beginning of the study, you would need to create an operational definition for consciousness, including detailed descriptions of specific behaviors that illustrate it. Then you might create a checklist of conscientious behaviors such as waiting to eat a snack, choosing only one prize from a toy box, and whispering when it's time to be quiet, as well as a coding system to help keep track of them. Good vibes. According to one naturalistic observation study, kids are more likely to express feelings like gratitude and compassion when their parents do. Mothers' expressions of compassion were the most powerful predictor, explaining over half the variance in children's expressions of positive emotion. McNeil and Repetti, 2021, page 172. These findings were made possible by video recording the interactions of 32 families in their homes. McNeil and Repetti, 2021. Naturalistic observation allows psychologists to observe participants going about their business in their normal environments without the disruptions of artificial laboratory settings. Perhaps the most important requirement of naturalistic observation is that the researchers must not disturb. Perhaps the most important requirement of naturalistic observation is that researchers must not disturb the participants or their environment. That way, participants won't change their normal behaviors, particularly those that the researchers wish to observe. Some problems arise with this arrangement, however. Natural environments may contain variables that the researchers are not interested in studying, but removing them can disrupt the natural setting they are striving to maintain. And because the variables in natural environments are so difficult to control, researchers may have trouble replicating findings. Suppose your study involved observing toddlers play with Legos at daycare. In the natural setting, you would not be able to control who played and when. Whoever showed up at the Lego table would become a participant in your study. Observer bias. How can we be sure observers will do a good job recording behaviors? If you haven't spent time around toddlers, you might pay attention to very different aspects of play behaviors If you haven't spent time around toddlers, you might pay attention to very different aspects of play behaviors than a researcher who raised 6 children. One way to avoid such problems is to include multiple observers and then determine how similarly they record the behaviors. If the observers don't execute this task in the same way, observer bias may exist. This refers to errors introduced as a result of an observer's value system, expectations, attitudes, or personal characteristics. Case study. Another descriptive research method is the case study, a detailed examination of an individual or small group. Case studies typically involve collecting a vast amount of data, often using multiple avenues to gather information. The process might include in-depth interviews with the person being studied and their friends, family, and coworkers, as well as questionnaires about medical history, career, and mental health. The goal of a case study is to provide a wealth of information from a variety of resources. Case studies are invaluable for studying rare events like the reunion of identical twins born in South Korea and reared on different continents. They may offer valuable information we can't get anywhere else. This research method also helps guide the design of studies on relatively underexplored topics. Stanovich 2019, such as the health and behavior of an astronaut on a space mission compared to his identical twin back on Earth. Garrett Bakelman, UTAL 2019. Unlike naturalistic observation, where the researcher assumes the role of detached spectator, the case study may require immersion in the participant's environment. How do you think this might impact the researcher's observations and the conclusions of the study? So many twins. Every year, twins, triplets, and other multiples from around the world gather in Twinsburg, Ohio, for the Twins Days Festival. In addition to participating in talent shows, watching fireworks, and marching in the Double Take Parade, attendees have the opportunity to meet the many scientists who flock to the festival in search of study participants. Dawidziak, 2018, Richards, 2018. One of the most fascinating case studies in the history of twin research is that of the Jim twins. Identical twins Jim Springer and Jim Lewis were separated shortly after birth and reunited at age 39. When the Jims finally met, they discovered some jaw-dropping similarities. Both were named James by their adoptive parents and gravitated toward math and carpentry as kids. Each man had a dog named Toy, a first wife named Linda, and a second wife named Betty. They even smoked the same cigarettes, Salem's, drove the same type of blue Chevy, and traveled to the same vacation spot in Florida. Leo, 1987, Minnesota Center for Twin and Family Research, 2016, Siegel, 2012. No matter how colorful or thought-provoking a case study may be, it cannot provide definitive support for a hypothesis, Stanovich, 2019. Hypothesis testing involves evaluating different conditions, and because the subject of a case study represents a sample of one, consisting of an individual or a single group, comparisons are impossible. Like other types of descriptive research, this method is useful for furthering the development of theories, but it cannot identify the causes of behaviors and events. Case studies are very specific examples, so they should not be used to make generalizations. In other words, we shouldn't draw broad conclusions from a specific instance. Suppose you are trying to examine how parent-child interactions at home might relate to preschoolers' transitions during morning drop-off. What would happen if you limited your research to a case study of a family with 2 working parents and 10 children? The dynamics of this family may not be representative of those in other families. We should not make sweeping generalizations based on our observations of a single person or group. Survey method. One of the fastest ways to collect data is the survey method, which relies on questionnaires or interviews. A survey is basically a series of questions that can be administered on paper, in face-to-face interviews, or via smartphone, tablet, and other digital devices. Your college might send out surveys to gauge students' attitudes about new online classes and ebooks, using questions such as, how often do you encounter technical difficulties with your online courses? Or, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with the assigned ebook? The benefit of the survey method is that you can gather data from numerous people in a short period of time. Surveys can be used alone or in conjunction with other research methods. Wording and honesty. Like any research design, the survey method has its limitations. The wording of survey questions can lead to biases in responses. Sometimes a single word can pack a powerful emotional punch,
Consider these two questions. Do you think people convicted of murder should be subject to the death penalty? Versus, do you think murderers should be subject to the death penalty? The word murderer might elicit more negative emotions for some people, which may impact the way they respond to the question. More importantly, participants are not always forthright in their responses, particularly when the survey touches on sensitive issues. In short, people lie to make themselves look good. It's not always easy for researchers to determine whether this tendency to strive for social desirability has influenced the results. In one study, male and female college students were asked questions about cheating in relationships. When participants were led to believe their responses were being analyzed by a lie detector, men and women were equally likely to admit to cheating behaviors. But when they believed their self-reports were anonymous, the men were more likely to confess than the women. Fisher and Brunel, 2014. Researchers in the field recommend collecting information anonymously if possible, noting the irony that infidelity is rooted in deceit and thus inimical, contrary to the truth that science seeks to illuminate. Fincham and May, 2017, page 73. Skimming the surface. Another disadvantage of the survey method is that it tends to skim the surface of people's beliefs or attitudes, failing to uncover why people respond the way they do. Ask 1,000 people if they intend to exercise regularly, and you might get a substantial number of affirmative responses. But yes might mean something quite different from one person to the next. Yes, it crosses my mind, but I can never go through with it. Versus yes, I have a specific plan, and I have been able to follow through. To obtain more precise responses, researchers conducting surveys often ask people to respond to statements using a scale indicating the degree to which they agree or disagree. For example, a 5-point scale ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree, or the degree to which they had an experience, a 5-point scale ranging from never to almost always. A sampling problem. Another common challenge is obtaining a representative sample. Many surveys fail to do so because their response rates fall short of ideal. If a researcher sends out 100 surveys to potential participants and only 20 people return them, how can we be sure that the answers of the 20 responders reflect those of the entire group? Or what if the survey is sent only to high school lacrosse players? Is that a representative sample of all people in the United States? Without a representative sample, we cannot generalize survey findings to the larger population. How can researchers get more people to respond to their surveys? Paying participants a small sum, about $3 in one study, may increase the response rate. Rob et al. 2017. Correlations. Is there a relationship? LO8 describe the correlation method and identify its limitations. When researchers collect data on many variables, it can be useful to determine if these variables are associated in some way. The correlational method examines relationships among variables and assists researchers in making predictions. A correlation represents a relationship or link between variables. Infographic 1.4, for example, there's a correlation between the amount of time parents spend reading books to their children and the number of vocabulary words the children know. The more the parents read, the more words their children learn. Logan et al. 2019. Pace et al. 2017. This is an example of a positive correlation. As one variable increases, so does the other. Positive correlations also work the opposite way. As one variable decreases, so does the other. The less time parents spend reading, the fewer vocabulary words their children know. Even though values of both variables are decreasing, this still represents a positive relationship. On the other hand, a negative correlation represents an inverse relationship, which means as one variable goes up, the other goes down. An example might be the quantity of time students spend using their smartphones and their performance in school. As phone usage increases, academic performance decreases. Domov et al. 2020, Samaha and Howie 2016. You have probably noticed correlations between variables in your own life. The longer you leave the lights on, the higher your electric bill. A positive correlation: the more you go shopping, the less money you have. A negative correlation: other links may be less obvious. For example, did you know that there is a correlation between social connectedness and physical health? Salary isn't everything. Working as a research assistant can be highly satisfying, even though you might not bring home a huge paycheck. Griswold, 2013, an analysis of 92 studies found a correlation coefficient R of 0.14 between salary and job satisfaction. Judge et al. 2010. Remember, the closer R is to 0.00, the weaker the relationship. Didn't see that coming. Is your social life affecting your health? The tighter someone is embedded in a network of friends, the less likely they are to become ill. Bisdock and Dunbar, 2020, page 717. Here we have an example of a negative correlation. As social connectedness goes up, the frequency of illness goes down. Why would this be the case? We can look to other correlations for clues. Studies suggest that immune responses may be stronger in people who are socially connected, a positive correlation. Bisdock and Dunbar, 2020. For example, one study found that college students with larger social networks, consisting of 13 to 20 people, as opposed to 4 to 12, produced more of a specific disease-fighting antibody after getting a flu vaccine. Pressman et al. 2005. Feeling supported by others has also been linked to lower levels of C-reactive protein, CRP, in some people. A negative correlation, CRP, is an indicator of chronic inflammation, which is a risk factor for heart disease, cancer, and other illnesses. Kudjoe et al. 2022, Lee and Wei 2019. These and other correlations do not equate to cause and effect, but they do suggest that the body and mind are linked. Correlation coefficient. Some variables are tightly linked, others weakly associated, and still others not related at all. Lucky for researchers, there is one number that indicates both the strength and direction, positive or negative, of the relationship, a statistical measure called the correlation coefficient, symbolized as R. Correlation coefficients range from 2 plus 1.00 to minus 1.00, with positive numbers indicating a positive relationship between variables and negative numbers indicating a negative inverse relationship between variables. The closer R is to plus 1.00 or to negative 1.00, the stronger the relationship. The closer R is to 0.00, the weaker the relationship. When the correlation coefficient is very close to 0, there may be no relationship between the variables. For example, consider the variables of shoe size and activity. Creativity. Are adults with bigger or smaller feet more creative? Probably not. There would be no link between these two variables, so the correlation coefficient between them, the R value, is around 0. Take a look at figure 1.3 and infographic 1.4 to see how correlation coefficients are portrayed on graphs called scatter plots.
percent who know someone with COVID-19 symptoms, percent wearing masks in public all or most of the time. Correlation coefficient equals minus 0.85. The horizontal axis represents percent wearing masks in public all or most of the time and ranges from 65 to 100 in increments of 5. The vertical axis represents percent who know someone with COVID-19 symptoms and ranges from 0 to 50 in increments of 10 from 0 to 10, then in increments of 5. Each plot is accompanied by U.S. state abbreviations. Approximate data from the graph reads as follows. Figure 1.3 Real-world correlations. The scatter plot above indicates a correlation between mask use and COVID-19 symptoms across U.S. states in October 2020. The horizontal x-axis shows the percentage of people in the state saying they usually wear masks in public. The vertical y-axis shows the percentage of people in the state acquainted with someone experiencing COVID-19 symptoms. This is an example of a negative correlation. As mask use increases, the frequency of observed COVID-19 symptoms decreases. More masks, less COVID-19. Ingram, 2020, para 5. Data from Carnegie Mellon's COVIDcast, covidcast.cmu.edu. Directionality. Now let's consider the direction of the relationship between variables. Researchers have reported a positive relationship between exposure to violence in media and aggressive behavior. Anderson and Bushman, 2023. APA 2020A, Bushman and Anderson 2023, Tang et al. 2022. Since there appears to be a positive correlation, you might assume that media exposure leads to aggression. The more time spent playing violent video games, the more aggressive a person is. But could it be that aggressive people are more likely to be attracted to violent video games in the first place? If this is the case, then aggressive tendencies influence the amount of time spent using violent media, not the other way around. The direction of the relationship, directionality matters. If we are talking about the relationship between aggression and exposure to violent media, the casual relationship could potentially go in both directions. Coin et al. 2020. Infographic 1.4, the correlation coefficient. What's in a number? A correlation indicates a relationship between two variables, such as the amount of time you spend studying and the grade you get on a test. The relationship is often indicated using a correlation coefficient, symbolized as R. To interpret the relationship using a correlation coefficient, R, ask yourself two questions. One, what is the direction of the relationship? 2, what is the strength of the relationship? A scatter plot shows what the relationship looks like. And remember, a correlation between two variables does not necessarily mean that one variable caused the change in the other variable. R equals plus 0.73. What is the direction of the correlation? Positive plus correlation. As one variable increases, the other also increases. Negative minus correlation. As one variable increases, the other decreases. An inverse relationship. What is the strength of the correlation? Strength ranges from plus 1.00 to negative 1.00. A value close to plus 1.00 or negative 1.00 is a strong correlation. A value close to 0.00 is a weak correlation. Example, plus 0.73 is a positive number showing a positive correlation. As hours spent studying increase, test grades also increase. Example, plus 0.73 is close to 1.00. This shows a strong correlation between hours spent studying and test grades. Beware of the potential third variable. Correlation does not indicate that one variable causes a change in the other. A third variable may have influenced the results. Example, although time spent studying and exam grades are strongly and positively correlated, attendance is another variable. Students who attend classes regularly tend to spend more hours studying. Likewise, students who attend classes regularly know what to expect on the test and are therefore likely to get better grades. What does the correlation look like? Using a scatter plot, we can express the relationship between two variables. One variable is labeled on the one variable is labeled on the horizontal axis, and the second variable is labeled on the vertical axis. Each dot represents one participant's scores on the two variables. Notice how the shape of the graph changes depending on the direction and strength of the relationship between the variables. Strong positive correlation plus 0.73, no relationship 0.00, strong negative correlation minus 0.73. Third variable. Even if there is a very strong correlation between two variables, this does not indicate a causal link exists between them. No matter how high the R value is or how logical the relationship seems, a correlation is not equivalent to a cause and effect connection. Getting back to the positive relationship between exposure to violence in media and aggressive behavior, it's easy to jump to the conclusion that the exposure causes the aggression, but maybe some third variable or unaccounted for characteristic of the participants or their environment can explain the relationship. Can you think of any additional variables that might cause increases or decreases in aggression? One possibility is parenting behaviors. Parents who limit and monitor exposure to violent media seem to have children who exhibit less aggressive behavior. Bushman et al. 2016. Perhaps some other quality of these parents, apart from their tendency to limit media exposure, causes their children to be less aggressive. Parenting style, therefore, would be considered a third variable because it influences both exposure to violence and aggressive behaviors. When you observe strong links between variables, consider other factors that could be related to both. Show what you know. 1. Describe research. Descriptive research is primarily useful for studying A. Operational definitions, B. Observer bias, C. New or unexplored topics, D. Visual spatial skills. The answer is C. New or unexplored topics. 2. If a researcher finds a positive correlation between smartphone use and absenteeism from work, why can't she claim that phone use causes absenteeism? The correlation method used The correlation method is useful for illuminating links between variables, and it helps researchers make predictions, but it cannot determine cause and effect. Even if variables x and y are strongly correlated, we cannot assume that changes in x are driving changes in y or vice versa. There may be some third variable influencing both x and y. Some possible third variables that may be involved in the correlation between smartphone use and absenteeism might include boredom on the job, an ill family member, or apathy about work. 3. A researcher studying parent behavior during preschool drop-off trains teachers to record how long it takes caregivers to enter and leave the classroom. This approach to collecting data is referred to as naturalistic observation. The experimental method. Together at last. May 14th, 2013 would be the most important day in the lives of Samantha Futerman and Anais Bordier. These young women who shared a womb and came into the world together would finally be reunited after 25 years of living on separate continents. The meeting would be captured on camera and become one of the most dramatic moments of their documentary film, Twinsters. Sam and the movie crew landed at London's Heathrow Airport, collected their luggage, and headed straight to the apartment they had rented for the reunion. Shortly after they arrived, a few of Anais's friends came over, and the wait for Anais began. Sam, surging with adrenaline, did not know what to do with herself. She was excited and scared, wanting to hide. Then she heard it, a laugh coming from behind the door. It sounded just like her own, but it was Anais. The first meeting. Sam and Anais's first meeting was both happy and stressful. Although this photo doesn't show them, several of their close friends were also there to witness the momentous event. As Anais recalls, it felt like a big family, so it was really comforting. I entered the room, and there was Sam. Anais recalls, neither of us knew what to do next, so we just stood in the middle of the room staring at each other, like two tiny dogs sniffing each other out. Bordier, ETAL 2014, page 151. The twins watched each other in amazement, averting eye contact and periodically erupting in nervous laughter. At one point, Anais reached over to poke Sam, as if to see if she was real. You don't know the person, but you know her very well because you can read her perfectly. Anais explains, it's the strangest thing. About 45 minutes, the whole group was emotionally exhausted and hungry. As they made their way toward a restaurant, Sam and Anais caught a glimpse of their reflection in a storefront window. We both kind of stopped and were like, that is so weird, Sam recalls. I'll never forget that moment. Following lunch, the twins returned to the apartment and took a nap together. Was it awkward crawling into bed and falling asleep with a person they had just met? Not awkward at all, says Anais. It took like 2 seconds. Control is the goal. Napping is what Sam and Anais do when they feel overwhelmed. It helps them reset and recharge. Many people use caffeine to achieve the same effect. They rely on soda, coffee, or energy drinks to clear away the mental fog that descends on them every afternoon. Research has linked low-moderate caffeine intake with various benefits, including increased alertness and improved attention, mood, and problem-solving skills. Wilhelmus, ETAL 2017, Zablina, and Sylvia 2020. Suppose you are interested in researching how caffeine impacts one of these variables, let's say increased attention. How could you isolate the effects of caffeine when so many other factors could potentially affect attention, such as nutrition, sleep habits, and physical health. There is a research method that allows you to monitor these possible sources of information. There is a research method that allows you to monitor these possible sources of There is a research method that allows you to monitor these possible sources of interference. The experimental method. LO9. Explain how the experimental method can establish cause and effect. Unlike the descriptive and correlational methods discussed earlier, the experimental method can tell us about cause and effect, as it aims to ensure that every variable except those being manipulated by the researcher is held constant or controlled. Refer to infographic 1.5. So how does the experimental method allow us to control variables? The researchers randomly assign participants to two or more groups that they try to make equivalent with respect to all variables, with one key exception: the treatment or manipulation being studied. If the groups differ on the variable of interest following this treatment or manipulation, we can say with confidence that the experimental manipulation caused that change. In this way, the experimental method allows researchers to observe the variable of interest without interference from other variables. If you are having trouble understanding what it means to control variables, consider this analogy. You are outside a football stadium, desperately trying to follow a friend lost in a swarm of people. Everyone is moving in different directions, making it exceedingly difficult to pinpoint your friend's location and direction of movement. But what if everyone in the crowd except your friend froze for a moment? Would it be easier to observe him now that he is the only one moving? This is similar to what researchers try to do with variables. Hold everything steady except the variables they are examining. How might you design a study using the experimental method? Suppose you want to investigate how caffeine impacts attention. Your hypothesis is the following: participants given a moderate dose of caffeine will perform better on a task that requires increased attention compared to participants given a sugar pill. To test this hypothesis, you need to put together a group of participants who are very similar in age, educational background, physical health, and other variables that might affect their ability to stay attentive. Next, you divide the participants into two groups, one that receives caffeine supplements and another that gets sugar pills. After participants take the treatment or sugar pill for a designated amount of time, you compare the two groups' performance on standard attention tasks. If the group receiving the caffeine supplements performs better, then you can attribute that difference to caffeine. This may sound straightforward, but there are still some critical concepts you need to understand. Random assignment. Assigning participants to groups is a crucial step in the experimental method. Fail to divide participants in the correct way, and your whole study is compromised. For this reason, researchers use random assignment to ensure that participants have an equal chance of being assigned to any of the groups. Randomly choosing which treatment the participants receive reduces the possibility that some other variable, a characteristic of the participants such as age or sensitivity to caffeine, will influence the findings. You can flip a coin, roll dice, or use a computer to generate numbers. But the goal of random assignment is always the same: to ensure that the groups are roughly equal on all characteristics. If the groups are lopsided with respect to some variable, the results may be affected. Getting back to your caffeine study, imagine you assigned all the teenage participants to one group and all the middle-aged participants to the other. Might age influence the results of a task measuring attention? Perhaps random assignment helps reduce some of the interference resulting from such characteristics. You may have noticed some similarities between random assignment and random sample introduced earlier in the chapter. Here's the difference. Random sampling is used at the onset of a study to gather participants from a larger population. Random assignment comes into play later when you are assigning participants to different groups. Experimental and control groups. Experimental and control groups. Returning to your study on caffeine supplements and attention. Let's assume you did use random assignment to divvy your participants into two groups. One group receives the treatment, a daily dose of caffeine, and the other gets no treatment at all. They are handed a sugar pill that looks identical to the caffeine supplement, or they are given nothing. Those who get the treatment, caffeine supplements, comprise the experimental group, and those who get no treatment, a sugar pill, or nothing at all, are members of the control group. You need a control group for the purpose of comparison. To determine the effects of the treatment, you must compare it to the effects of no treatment. Well, I guess we're the control group. Independent and dependent variables. Let's restate a point we made earlier in the section, this time using some new vocabulary terms. The only difference between the experimental and control groups should be the variable researchers are manipulating, in this case, caffeine intake. The different treatment given to the two groups is called the independent variable, IV, because it is the one variable the researchers are deliberately changing. In this case, some participants get caffeine, others a sugar pill, or nothing at all. This is a critical point, and it's worth restating. In the experimental method, the independent variable is the variable researchers are manipulating because of the complex nature of human behavior. There may be more than one independent variable in a given experiment. The dependent variable, DV, refers to the characteristic or response researchers are observing or measuring. As with the independent variable, there may be more than one independent variable in a given study. In our hypothetical experiment, the dependent variable is the participants' performance on various attention tasks. Just remember, the independent variable is what the researchers are manipulating, and the dependent variable is what they are measuring as a result of that manipulation. In other words, researchers are trying to determine whether the dependent variable, in this case performance on the attention tasks, depends on the independent variable, caffeine supplement, or sugar pill. Extraneous variables. When planning experiments, researchers must take steps to ensure that extraneous variables do not interfere with their measures. Extraneous variables are characteristics of the environment or participants that could potentially affect the outcome of the research. While conducting your study of caffeine supplements, you discover that 3 of the participants are particularly sensitive to caffeine. Even small doses make it very difficult for them to sleep at night. Their resulting sleep deprivation can definitely influence performance on attention tasks. Unfortunately, you fail to consider this very important variable in your research design, and thus, it is an extraneous variable. Researchers must contemplate the many different kinds of variables that could influence the dependent variable. In some cases, extraneous variables can confound the results of an experiment. A confounding variable is a type of extraneous variable that changes in sync with the independent variable, making it very difficult to discern which variable. The independent variable or the confounding variable is causing changes in the dependent variable. Remember how we discussed third variables in correlational studies. Just as third variables can muddle the results of correlational studies, confounding variables can interfere with the outcomes of experimental studies. Let's explore this concept of confounding variables further. Returning to our hypothetical caffeine study, imagine the lab is not big enough to accommodate all participants at once, so you collect data from the experimental group in the morning and the control group in the evening. But when you compare the two groups' performance on attention tasks, how can you be sure the differences result from the caffeine supplements and not the time of day the data were collected? Participants may be more alert in the morning, so the time of day and not just the caffeine supplement could be driving changes in attentional capacity, and perhaps the behavior of the lab assistants changes as the day wears on, which in turn could influence the behavior of participants. Do you see how the time of day and certain variables associated with it could be confounding variables? The good news is that we can take steps to minimize the influence of extraneous variables. That is, we can control variables. Earlier, we explained how researchers control variables with the help of random assignment. In the caffeine study, that would help to ensure that both groups have approximately the same number of participants who are sensitive to caffeine, meaning they don't sleep well after using it. Another way to control the impact of caffeine sensitivity is to remove the caffeine-sensitive participants from your sample and not include their information in your statistical analysis. Finally, you can minimize the influence of extraneous variables by treating the experimental and control groups exactly the same. For example, giving them attention tasks at the same time and location. If you succeed in holding all variables constant except the independent variable, then you can make a statement about cause and effect. Getting back to your study on caffeine and attention, let's say the participants who took caffeine supplements perform better on attention tasks than those in the placebo group. It is relatively safe to attribute that disparity to the independent variable. In other words, you can presume that the caffeine supplements caused the superior performance of the experimental group. Double-blind study. When using the experimental method or any type of research design, researchers use different methods to help control for extraneous variables. In a single blind study, for example, participants do not know what treatment they are receiving. With a double-blind study, both the participants and the blind researchers working directly with those participants are unaware who is getting the real treatment and who is getting the pretend treatment. In your caffeine study, this would mean that the people administering the pills and the attention tasks would not know who was receiving the caffeine supplement and who was receiving the sugar pill, nor would the participants be privy to this information. Keeping participants in the dark is relatively easy. Just make sure the treatment and sugar pill appear identical. Concealing details from the researchers is a little trickier, but can be accomplished with the help of clever assistants who make it appear that all participants are getting the same treatment. Why is the double-blind study such a strong experimental design? It has to do with what's going on inside the minds of both participants and researchers. Thinking is believing. Prior research tells us that the expectations of participants can influence results. If someone hands you a cup of decaf coffee and says it is regular, you may feel energized after drinking it because you think it is caffeinated. Similarly, if someone gives you a sugar pill but tells you it is real medicine, you might end up feeling better simply because this is what you expect. Apparently, thinking is believing. When people are given a fake pill or other inactive treatment known as a placebo, they often get better even though the contents of the pill are inert. Remarkably, this effect occurs even when participants are told they are receiving a placebo. Lee Bowitz, et al., 2019, the placebo effect has been shown to ease pain, anxiety, depression, and even symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And although placebos are not able to reduce the size of tumors, and although placebos are not able to reduce the size of tumors, they can help with some of the side effects, cancer treatments such as pain And although placebos are not able to reduce the size of tumors, they can help with some of the side effects of cancer treatments, such as pain, fatigue, and nausea. Kapchuk and Miller, 2015. Researchers believe the placebo effect arises through both conscious expectations and unconscious associations between treatment cues and healing, and these psychological processes may influence what happens on a psychological level. In other words, expectations can influence what's going on in the body. Looks real. One of the pills contain an active ingredient, the other is a placebo. People taking placebos often experience benefits that are similar to those reported by participants receiving the actual drug. They can even experience similar side effects. Coloca, 2017. Experimenter bias. We discovered the rationale for keeping participants in the dark, but why is it necessary to keep the researchers clueless as well? Researchers' expectations can influence the outcome of a study, a phenomenon known as experimenter bias. A researcher may unwittingly color a study's outcome through subtle verbal and or nonverbal communication with the participants, conveying hopes or beliefs about the experiment's results. Nichols and Edlund, 2015, saying something like, "I really have high hopes for this medicine," might influence participants' reaction to the treatment. The researcher's value system may also impact the results in barely noticeable but very important ways. Beliefs and attitudes can shape the way a researcher frames questions, tests hypotheses, or interprets findings. Rosenthal, 1966-2002, B. Stanley, ETAL, 2018. Smart horse or biased humans. Clever Hans, picture here with his trainer Wilhelm von Osten, was a horse that appeared to be capable of counting, solving math problems, and a host of other cognitive tasks. When prompted with a question, Hans would signal the right answer by tapping his hooves. But as it turned out, Hans was just a brilliant reader of human behavior. By looking at the person asking the questions, Hans could tell when he was about to answer correctly. If Hans was wearing blinders, his amazing problem-solving ability vanished. Fungst, 1911, Samhita, Anne Gross, 2013. The case of clever Hans illustrates experimenter bias, or the tendency for the experimenter's views or expectations to color the results of a study. Rosenthal, 1965. Infographic 1.5, the experimental method. Are you in control? The experimental method is the type of research that can tell us about the causes and effects. It is different from descriptive and correlational studies in that key aspects of the experiment, participants, variables, and study implementation are tightly controlled. The experiment typically includes at least two groups, an experimental group and a control group. This allows the researcher to isolate the effects of manipulating a single variable, called the independent variable. Imagine you want to know if laws that ban texting while driving are worthwhile. Does texting really cause more accidents? Perhaps texting is merely correlated with higher accident rates in certain populations, such as college students, because college students are both more likely to text and more likely to have accidents. In order to find out, you have to perform an experiment. Variables. Independent variable, the variable that researchers deliberately manipulate. Example, the independent variable is texting while driving. Experimental group drives through obstacle course while texting. Control group drives through obstacle course without texting. Dependent variable, the variable measured as an outcome of manipulation of the independent variable. Example, the dependent variable is the number of accidents objects hit an obstacle course. Extraneous variable, an unforeseen factor or characteristic that could interfere with the outcome. Example, some participants have more driving experience than others. Without controlling the amount of driving experience, we can't be certain the independent variable caused more accidents. Participants, representative sample, subset of the population chosen to reflect population of interest. Example, participants must be college students. Other groups might be affected differently by the independent variable. Random sample, method used to ensure participants do not introduce unexpected bias. Example, researchers recruit participants by randomly selecting students from the college directory. Research question, does texting while driving cause accidents? To test the research question, you must control participants' variables and study implementation. Study implementation, random assignment, process by which researcher randomly assigns participants to experimental or control group. Example, experimenter flips coin to determine participants' group. Experimenter bias, researchers' expectations and unintentional behaviors can unwittingly change the outcome of a study. Example, without thinking, researchers say good luck to one group. This might unintentionally cause them to try harder. When possible, researchers control for these effects by using a double-blind study in which neither researcher nor participant knows what group participants are assigned to. Reliability and validity. When evaluating a study, we should consider two important qualities of the measures used to collect data: reliability and validity. Reliability refers to the consistency or stability of a measure. A reliable test is one that yields consistent results across time. For example, if you take a personality test today and 1 week from now, the results should be very similar. The other important quality is the validity of measures used in a study. Do they measure what they intend to measure? In the example above, the personality test should measure personality characteristics, not some other variables. When examining an entire study, we should consider both its internal validity and external validity. If an experiment has internal validity, its design allows it to measure what it intends to measure. Campbell and Stanley, 1963. When an experiment has external validity, that means its findings can be generalized to the population of interest. Studies that use representative samples are more likely to have external validity. The results can be generalized from samples to populations. Nothing is perfect. You have now learned the nuts and bolts of the experimental method, one of psychology's greatest myth-debunking, knowledge-gathering tools. The experimental method is also distinguished by its ability to establish cause and effect, but like any scientific approach, it does have some drawbacks. Laboratory settings are inherently unnatural and therefore cannot always paint an accurate picture of behaviors that would occur in natural settings. When people know they are being observed, their behaviors changes. Researchers call this the Hawthorne effect. Goodwin, ETAL 2017, Olson, ETAL 2004. Other weaknesses of the experimental method include cost. It's expensive to maintain a laboratory, and time collecting data in a laboratory setting can be much slower than, say, sending out a survey. Finally, there are instances when it is not possible or ethical to manipulate certain variables. Table 1.2 gives an overview of some of the advantages and disadvantages of the research methods we have described. Table 1.2 Research Methods, Pros and Cons. Table 1.2 Research Methods, Pros and Cons. Research Method, Advantages, Disadvantages. Research Method, Descriptive. Advantages, good for tackling new research questions and studying phenomena in natural environments. Disadvantages, very little control, increased experimenter and participant bias, cannot determine cause and effect. Research method, correlation, A research method correlational advantages shows whether two variables are related, useful when an experimental method is not possible. Disadvantages directionality and third variable problems cannot determine cause and effect. Research method experimental advantages can determine cause and effect, increased control over variables. Disadvantages results may not generalize beyond a lab setting, potential for extraneous variables. How does a researcher choose which method to use? It depends on the research question. Each approach has advantages and disadvantages. Before we move on, let's test our understanding of the experimental method with the help of a sprightly yellow square named SpongeBob. Think critically. SpongeBob on the brain. A little television won't hurt a child, will it? Kids programs are interspersed with lessons on colors, words, and numbers, and run only for periods of 20 to 30 minutes. It seems reasonable to assume that little snippets of TV can't possibly have any measurable effect. When it comes to the rapidly developing juvenile brain, it's probably not safe to assume anything. Consider the following experiment examining the cognitive changes observed in preschool children after just 9 minutes of exposure to a talking yellow sponge zipping across a television screen. The research participants were 64-year-olds, most of whom came from white upper middle class households. Researchers randomly assigned the children to one of three conditions: watching the extremely fast-paced cartoon SpongeBob SquarePants, viewing an educational program, or drawing with crayons and markers. Following 9 minutes of the assigned activities, the children took a series of 4 commonly used tests to assess their executive function, the collection of brain processes involved in self-control, decision-making, problem-solving, and other higher-level functions. The results were shocking. Children in the SpongeBob group performed considerably worse than those in the other groups. Lillard and Peterson, 2011, just 9 minutes of SpongeBob produced a temporary lapse in cognitive function. Sponge brain. No one expects cartoons to make kids smarter, but can they hurt them? One study suggests that preschool children watching just 9 minutes of high-energy, ultra-stimulating kids show SpongeBob SquarePants experience a temporary dip in cognitive function. One study suggests that preschool children watching just 9 minutes of high-energy, ultra-stimulating kids show SpongeBob SquarePants experience a temporary dip in cognitive function. How do we know that this was not the result of a different variable, such as some children's pre-existing attentional issues or television watching habits at home? Those factors were accounted for in the study. In the experimental method, researchers hold nearly all variables constant except the one they want to manipulate, the 9-minute activity in this case. This is the independent variable IV. In this way, the researchers can be somewhat confident that changes in the IV are driving changes in the dependent variable DV, performance on the cognitive tests. What aspect of the cartoon caused this effect? The researchers hypothesized it had something to do with the show's fantastical events and fast pacing. Lillard and Peterson, 2011, page 648. And more recent research suggests that the fantastical content may be the problem. Rhodes et al. 2020 shows that are highly fantastical or involve physically impossible events. For example, cartoon characters that magically change shape or disappear in proofs. Shows that are highly fantastical or involve physically impossible events. For example, cartoon characters that magically change shape or disappear in poofs of smoke seem to compromise short-term executive function in a way that non-fantastical shows do not. The negative impact of fantasy is even apparent with slow-paced programs like Little Einsteins and educational shows such as Martha Speaks. Lillard ETAL 2015. Skeptics point out that findings from the original SpongeBob study have been difficult to replicate and that children are exposed to fantastical content elsewhere, even in classic storybooks such as Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak, Scarf, and Hinton 2018. And who could argue that imaginative storybooks are bad for children? In fact, research suggests that exposure to fantastical content in books has cognitive benefits such as increased vocabulary development. Weisberg ETL 2015. Many questions remain, but parents would be wise to impose limits as greater amounts of screen time have been linked to developmental delays and behavior problems in children. Irish ETAL 2022, Madigan ETAL 2019. The relationship is not so surprising. When young children are observing screens, they may be missing important opportunities to practice and master interpersonal, motor, and communication skills. Madigan ETAL 2019 PE5. Is the research ethical? LO10. Demonstrate an understanding of research ethics. Conducting psychological research carries an enormous ethical responsibility. Psychologists do not examine dinosaur fossils or atomic particles. They study humans and other living creatures who experience pain, fear, and other complex feelings. And it is their professional duty to treat them with dignity and respect. A lofty responsibility. A psychologist who studies children must obtain informed consent from parents or legal guardians. Interacting with minors involves additional ethical considerations. In the social psychology chapter, you will learn about some of the most famous and ethically questionable studies in the history of psychology. These studies would never be approved today, as psychologists have established specific guidelines to help ensure ethical behavior in their field. Professional organizations such as the American Psychological Association, APA, and the Association for Psychological Science, APS, provide written guidelines their members agree to follow. These guidelines attempt to ensure the ethical treatment of research participants, both human and non-human. Keep in mind that notions of ethical treatment are highly variable. Not everyone agrees with the codes established by these organizations. The guidelines encourage psychologists to do no harm, safeguard the welfare of living beings in their research, know their responsibilities to society and community, maintain accuracy in research, teaching, and practice, and respect human dignity, among other best practices. APA 2017, March. Whose words are these? As mentioned earlier, psychologists disseminate information by publishing articles in scientific journals. Along with this comes an ethical responsibility to give credit where credit is due. Using the activity below, explore how APA 2020B style supports the fair use of other people's work. Try this. A. Pick any two sentences in this chapter and copy them word for word at the top of a piece of paper. B. Copy the sentences again, but this time include quotation marks at its beginning and end, and use APA style to cite the author's last names, year of publication, and page number from the textbook. C. Paraphrase the content in your own words and use APA style to cite the author's last names and year of publication. D. Which of the above constitutes plagiarism and which does not? Why is it important to cite other people's work, and how do the APA guidelines make it obvious whose words are being used? Confidentiality. An important component of ethical treatment is confidentiality. Researchers must take steps to protect research data from misuse or theft. Psychologists who offer therapy services are obligated to keep client and therapy session information confidential. In fact, they are required to safeguard this information in their offices. Confidentiality enables clients to speak freely about deeply personal issues. It ensures that research participants feel protected when they share sensitive information about sexual or controversial matters, for example, because they may rest assured researchers will keep it safe. There are some associations when psychologists are legally required to break confidentiality. For example, when a client is a danger to self or others, including the psychologist. In cases of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence, or when the psychologist receives a court order, APA ND-C. At the client's request, psychologists may also share confidential information with an organization, physician, or legally authorized individual. Additionally, psychologists may share a limited amount of information in order to receive payment for services, but only the minimum that is necessary. APA 2017, March, para 4.05. Informed consent. Ethical treatment also involves sharing information. Researchers have a duty to tell participants as much as they can about a study's purpose and procedures. They do this through informed consent and debriefing. Suppose you want to study a certain population, college seniors in the United States, for example. You have identified your sample, but before enlisting these people as participants and collecting data, you must make certain they are comfortable with their involvement. Through informed consent, these students in your study acknowledge that they understand what their participation will entail, including any possible harm that could result. Informed consent is a critical part of Dr. Siegel's twin studies. You prepare a letter and you have to keep a copy yourself and give the participants a signed copy as well. She explains it lays out everything they will be doing, what some of their benefits are, what some of the risks might be, and that you will ensure them confidentiality. You don't give away hypotheses, but you speak about the research in a more general way because you don't want to bias the findings. It's kind of like your contract with them, and they're also free to withdraw from the study or refuse to do something at any point. Informed consent is a participant's way of saying, I understand my role in this study, and I am okay with it. It's also the researcher's way of ensuring that participants know what they are getting into. Debriefing. Following a study, there is a second step of disclosure called debriefing. In a debriefing session, researchers provide participants with useful information about the study. In some cases, this means revealing any deception or manipulation used, information that couldn't be shared beforehand. Remember that concealing information is a key part of the double-blind study. Other types of psychological research require withholding information as well. In this book, you will learn about experiments in which participants were initially unaware of the study's purpose. In some cases, researchers purposely lied to participants either because it was part of the manipulation or because they needed to conceal the study's objective until the debriefing phase. It is important to note that no one is or should ever be forced to become a research participant. Involvement is completely voluntary and participants can drop out at any time. And finally, all experiments on humans and animals must be approved by an institutional review board, IRB, to ensure the highest ethical standards. An IRB is a committee that reviews research proposals to protect the right and welfare of all participants. Think critically. Don't believe everything you read. As you venture deeper into the study of psychology, you may find yourself becoming increasingly skeptical of media reports on research relating to psychological phenomena. We encourage a healthy dose of skepticism. Although many news stories on scientific findings are accurate and balanced, others are distorted and exaggerated. Look at these headlines about a 2020 study investigating the relationship between food and psychological health. Study claims eating meat can help improve mental health. Cortez 2020, eating meat may improve mental health, and 1 in 3 vegetarians are depressed, study suggests. Pinkstone 2020. It sounds as if meat-based diets are causing better mental health, while vegetarian diets create psychological problems. We must have a cause and effect relationship, right? Wrong. The following is a rough description of the research, which was actually a review of many studies published in the journal Critical Reviews in Food Science and Nutrition. Researchers combed through the scientific literature looking for studies examining links between meat consumption or meat avoidance and variables related to mental health. 18 studies met the researchers' criteria for inclusion. Taken together, the results point to an association between meat avoidance and higher levels of anxiety and depression. Dobracek et al. 2020. Hyped up associations. Does eating meat cause people to experience better mental health outcomes, or does evidence suggest a correlation between these two variables? If you read a headline claiming X causes Y, immediately turn on your critical thinking skills. Media reports sometimes suggest causation when the findings are based only on correlations. Provocative as these findings may be, they do not allow us to conclude that eating meat causes less anxiety and depression. In fact, the authors are careful to point this out. Across all studies, there was no evidence to support a causal relation between the consumption or avoidance of meat and any psychological outcomes. Dobracek et al. 2020, page 9. Isn't it possible that some third variable is at work, driving both eating behaviors and mental health symptoms? For example, research suggests that many people choose to become vegetarian for health reasons. Hopwood et al. 2020. Could it be that concerns about health are driving both anxiety and decisions to eliminate meat? Another factor to consider is the direction of causation. When we read headlines like those above, we tend to assume that cutting out meat leads to mental health issues. But what if the reverse is true? That is, experiencing anxiety or depression makes people more inclined to stop eating meat. Dobracek et al. 2020. The take-home message. If a news report claims that X causes Y, don't automatically assume that the media has it right. In this case, the research has only demonstrated a correlation between variables, not a cause and effect relationship. Connections. In Chapter 0, we explained that psychology is driven by critical thinking, a process that involves synthesizing evidence, thinking beyond definitions, and being open-minded but skeptical at the same time. Here we emphasize the importance of thinking critically about media reports of research findings. News stories can sometimes be misleading or inaccurate. Scientists debate whether humans are causing global warming. Danger, melting, 97% say yes, 3% say no. Extended description for false balance in the media. False balance in the media. If 97% of climate scientists agree that humans are causing global warming and only 3% disagree, why do news outlets sometimes present this issue as a debate? between two individuals by giving equal attention to the two viewpoints. The media promotes the misconception that scientists are split 50-50 on the issue. We call this false balance. Career connections, communicating with the public. Given the previous example, you can see how important it is for journalists to understand the difference between correlation and causation. The same goes for public relations PR specialists who act as liaisons between institutions, universities, companies, etc., and the outside world. Imagine you are a PR specialist for a university and your job is to share research developments with the media and the general public. You write a press release describing the results of a study on herbal supplements intended to ease depression. If you exaggerate or misrepresent the results, the supplement worked better than approved antidepressants. If you exaggerate or misrepresent the results, the supplement worked better than approved antidepressants. The public may get the wrong idea. What might happen if people with symptoms of depression suddenly stopped taking their regular medications and begin using an herbal supplement with questionable scientific backing? Another tip for journalists, PR specialists, and anyone who shares complex information with the general public: avoid using fancy words. Non-experts have trouble processing information when they are presented with scientific jargon, even if definitions are provided. This may cause them to lose interest in the subject matter and feel less engaged with the scientific community. Shulman, ETAL 2020. Show what you know. 1. The experimental method can provide findings on the blank of variables. A. Experimenter bias. B. Confounding. C. Random assignment. D. Cause and effect relationship. The answer is D. Cause and effect relationship. The experimental method can provide findings on the cause and effect relationship. Question number 2. Following a study involving a double-blind procedure with a treatment and placebo, a researcher met with each participant individually to discuss important information about the study. This is known as a debriefing. Following a study involving a double-blind procedure with a treatment and a placebo, a researcher met with each participant individually to discuss important information about the study. This is known as a debriefing. Question number 3. What safeguards are in place to protect research participants from harm? At any major research institution, experiments on humans and animals must be approved by an Institutional Review Board, IRB. An IRB is a committee that reviews research proposals to ensure that the rights and welfare of all participants are protected. Anything is possible. The momentous meeting of Sam and Anais marked the beginning of a new journey for the twins and their families. Sam's parents embraced Anais as a second daughter, and Anais's parents did the same with Sam. As Anais says, we really see our family as one huge, one living in America and one in France. When Sam imagines what life would be like if she never connected with Anais, she sees a version of herself that is more self-absorbed. I would have been so focused on my career acting and pushing myself, and it would have been all about me, she says. Now I have this amazing human across the world that I'm always thinking about and always worrying about. For Anais, finding Sam has made her feel complete in a way she never did before. I definitely was missing something. I don't know if it was from being adopted or from being separated from Sam, says Anais. I feel complete now. When Anais looks at Sam, it's almost like observing herself from the outside. She sees a smart, funny, and charismatic young woman. Appreciating Sam's beautiful qualities has given her newfound confidence. I feel like now anything is possible thanks to Sam. Didn't see that coming. Introducing positive psychology. Sam and Anais are wonderful examples of people who opt to see the brighter side of life instead of laminating the fact that they spent 25 years apart. They rejoice in being united, anticipate good things to come, and want to help other twins and adoptees. The twins' viewpoint seems to align with the positive psychology movement in the study of human behaviors and mental processes. A relatively new approach in the field, positive psychology explores human flourishing and the positive aspects of human nature, happiness, love, courage, humor, and all that is best about people. Kennison, 2020, A. Seligman, and Csikszent Mihaly, 2000. Historically, psychologists have tended to focus on the abnormal and maladaptive patterns of human behavior. Positive psychology does not deny the existence of these darker elements. It just directs the spotlight elsewhere. Positive psychologists explore not only the goodness of individuals but also the many social and cultural factors associated with well-being. Lomas et al. 2020. They believe that humans strive to lead meaningful, happy, and good lives. Donaldson et al. 2015, page 185. In this sense, positive psychology is similar to the humanistic perspective. In fact, the early work of the humanists helped set the stage for the current field of positive psychology. Friedman, 2014, Robbins, 2008. Many positive psychology studies produced results with immediate relevance to everyday life. For example, one group of researchers studied the mental health of single mothers during the COVID-19 pandemic. They found that moms who counted their blessings, felt gratitude, were less likely to have mental health issues. These findings lend credence to the notion that gratitude lowers stress and mental health problems due to the way it prompts people to reframe and interpret their life circumstances and to focus on positive emotions. Taylor, 2022, page 355. Throughout this book, you will read about people whose lives seem to exemplify the power of this optimistic approach. Each chapter introduces you to one or more individuals who have faced challenges with courage and positive. Each chapter introduces you to one or more individuals who have faced challenges with courage and positivity, keeping their heads high when all hope seems to be lost. Learning about these men and women has been a humbling experience for the authors. Their stories inspire us to be more thoughtful, compassionate, and fearless in our own lives. We hope they move you in the same way. As you proceed through these chapters, look for the positive messages that can be found in all types of psychological research. Open your mind and keep reading. Sister Love. Sam and Anais, on their trip to South Korea, where they attended a conference of the International Korean Adoptee Associations. Now that the twins have found each other, they want to help others. Sam and fellow actress Jenna Ushkowitz, also a Korean adoptee, founded Kindred, a nonprofit foundation that provides support and resources for adoptees and their families. Kindred ND. Anais, now a designer for the fine leather company Jean Rousseau, hopes to create an educational foundation for orphans and adopted children. Video profile. Sam and Anais. You asked, they answered. Chapter 1 Review, Summary of Concepts. LO1 Describe the scope of psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Psychologists work in a variety of fields, and many conduct research. The two major types of research are basic and applied. Basic research focuses on collecting data to support or refute theories, gathering knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Applied research focuses on changing behaviors and outcomes, often leading to real-world applications. LO2 summarize the goals of psychology. The goals of psychology are to describe, explain, predict, and change behavior. These goals lay the foundation for the scientific approach and the research designs used by psychologists. LO3 identify some of the people who laid the foundation for psychology or helped establish it as a discipline. Specify their contributions. The roots of psychology lie in disciplines as diverse as philosophy and physiology. Early philosophers established the foundation for some of the long-standing debates in psychology, nature and nurture, and embraced scientific ways of thinking. In 1879, psychology was officially founded when Wundt created the first psychology laboratory. Titchener established structuralism to study the elements of the mind. James developed functionalism and offered the first psychology class in the United States. LO4 summarized the major perspectives in psychology. Psychologists use different perspectives to understand and study topics in the field. Each perspective provides a different vantage point for uncovering the complex nature of human behavior. Refer to Table 1.1 for a summary. LO5 describe how psychologists use the scientific method. Psychologists use the scientific method to produce empirical evidence based on systematic observation or experiments. The scientific method includes 5 basic steps: develop a question, formulate a hypothesis, collect data, analyze data, and share findings. A continuing cycle of exploration. The scientific method uses critical thinking at each step in the process and asks new questions along the way. LO6 explain the importance of a representative sample. A population includes all members of a group a researcher is interested in exploring. If the population is large, then the researcher will select a subset called a sample. With a random sample, all members of a population have an equal chance of being selected to participate in a study. Random sampling increases the likelihood of achieving a representative sample, or one that accurately reflects the population of interest. It is important for researchers to choose representative samples because this allows them to generalize their findings or apply information from a sample to the population at large. LO7 recognize several forms of descriptive research. Descriptive research is a type of investigation used to describe and explore a phenomenon. It is especially useful for studying new or unexplored topics when researchers might not have specific expectations about outcomes. Descriptive research methods include naturalistic observation, case studies, and the survey method. LO8 describe the correlation method and identify its limitations. The correlation method examines relationships among variables. Variables can be positively correlated. As one variable goes up, the other goes up. Variables can be positively correlated. As one variable goes up, the other goes up. Negatively correlated. As one variable goes up, the other goes down, or not at all related. While useful for illuminating links between variables and helping researchers make predictions, the correlational method cannot determine cause and effect. Even a very strong correlation between two variables does not indicate a causal. Even a very strong correlation between two variables does not indicate a causal link, as a third variable might be influencing both. LO9 explain how the experimental method can establish cause and effect. The experimental method is a type of research that can uncover cause and effect relationships between independent and dependent variables. A well-designed experiment holds everything constant except for the variables being manipulated by the researcher. If the groups of participants differ on the measure of interest, we can say with confidence that the experimental manipulation caused that damage. LO10 demonstrated an understanding of research ethics. Researchers must follow guidelines to ensure the ethical treatment of research participants. These guidelines encourage psychologists to do no harm, safeguard the welfare of living beings in their research, know their responsibilities to society and community, maintain accuracy in research, teaching and practice, and respect human dignity. Key terms: behaviorism, behavioral perspective, biological perspective, biopsychosocial perspective, case study, cognitive perspective, confounding variable, control group, correlation, correlation coefficient, correlational method, critical thinking, debriefing, dependent variable, DV, descriptive research, double-blind study, empirical method, evolutionary perspective, experiment, experimental group, experimental method, experimenter bias, extravenous variable, functionalism, humanistic psychology, hypothesis, independent variable, IV, informed consent, institutional review board, IRB, introspection, natural selection, nature, naturalistic observation, nurture, observer bias, operational definition, placebo, population, positive psychology, psychoanalytic perspective, psychologists, psychology, random assignment, random sample, replicate, representative sample, sample, scientific method, sociocultural perspective, structuralism, survey method, theory, third variable, variables. Chapter 2, Biology and Behavior. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Psychology, 4th edition. Chapter 2,